Sleeping Stories.
Ra's al Ghul, the immortal enemy Batman could never defeat. Chapter 1. The Demon's Head. The Lazarus Pit steamed in the hidden cave beneath the Himalayan mountains, its emerald waters bubbling with ancient alchemy and forbidden science. The air thick with sulfur and something else, something that smelled like eternity rotting at the edges. Bruce Wayne stood at the precipice, bleeding from a dozen wounds, his mask torn away, staring into the eyes of a man who should have been dead 300 years ago. Ra's al Ghul smiled, and in that smile lay the weight of empires fallen, civilizations erased, and an offer that would haunt Bruce Wayne for the rest of his life. Marry my daughter. Inherit my empire. Help me kill 4 billion people to save the world. And Bruce Wayne, the Batman, the incorruptible guardian of justice, hesitated. For one terrible heartbeat that stretched into infinity, he actually considered it. That moment of hesitation cost more lives than Bruce Wayne could ever count. But to understand why the world's greatest detective nearly became the heir to history's most prolific mass murderer, we must go back. Back to when Batman first heard whispers of a name that existed in the shadows between myth and terrorism. Back to when Gotham's Dark Knight realized that some enemies cannot be beaten because they have already won. The file arrived at Wayne Manor on a Tuesday in October. No return address, no postmark. Simply a manila envelope placed precisely in the center of Bruce's desk in the Batcave, which should have been impossible because the Batcave's security system could detect a mosquito's heartbeat from 50 yards away. Inside the envelope, a single photograph. It showed Bruce Wayne at age 20, climbing the mountains of North Korea during his training years. Years the public, Bruce Wayne had supposedly spent partying across Europe. On the back of the photograph, written in perfect calligraphy, 3 words: I found you. Alfred Pennyworth examined the envelope with the precision of his former MI6 training, searching for prints, for traces, for any evidence of how it arrived. He found nothing, not a single fiber. Not a molecule of identifying material. Whoever delivered this envelope understood forensics better than most intelligence agencies. Bruce stared at the photograph, his mind racing through the dozens of mentors he had studied under during those years, trying to remember who might have taken this picture, who might have kept it, who might have the resources to penetrate the Batcave itself. The answer came 3 nights later, when Batman intercepted an arms shipment at Gotham Harbor. The shipment contained weapons that did not exist on any market, black or otherwise. Swords forged with techniques lost since the 13th century. Poisons that modern science had no names for. And explosives built with a chemical compound that Batman's analyzer could not identify. As he examined the cargo, a shadow moved behind him. Impossible silent, impossibly fast. Batman spun, batarang already flying toward the darkness. The blade was caught mid-flight, between 2 fingers. A man stepped into the dim light of the harbor, and Batman felt something he rarely experienced anymore. Recognition of a superior opponent. The man was perhaps 60, but moved with the grace of an Olympic gymnast. His face was aristocratic, sharp, with a beard trimmed to mathematical precision, and eyes that held the cold calculation of a chess grandmaster evaluating a promising student. He wore robes that seemed to shift between modern and ancient, and when he spoke, his voice carried the accent of everywhere and nowhere at once. Detective, the man said, and in that single word Batman heard respect that no criminal had ever offered him. I am Ra's al Ghul, and I have been searching for you for a very long time. Batman's hand moved toward another batarang, but Ra's raised a palm, the gesture commanding enough to pause even the Dark Knight. If I wanted you dead, detective, you would have died in your cave 3 nights ago when I delivered my greeting. I am not here as your enemy. I am here to offer you a gift, the truth about what you are fighting and why you cannot win. The harbor lights flickered, and in that moment of darkness, Ra's al Ghul vanished. Batman searched the entire warehouse complex, deployed every sensor, tracked every possible exit. Nothing. The man had evaporated like morning mist, leaving behind only questions and the unsettling certainty that he had allowed Batman to see him. That this entire encounter had been a test, an introduction, a opening move in a game Batman did not yet understand he was playing. Over the following weeks, evidence of Ra's al Ghul appeared like breadcrumbs designed for the world's greatest detective. A conspiracy theorist's website mentioned the Demon's Head, a title given to a man who supposedly guided human history from the shadows. An Interpol report, classified and encrypted, referenced an organization called the League of Assassins, responsible for political murders spanning 3 centuries but never leaving evidence substantial enough for prosecution. A CIA file, buried so deep that accessing it triggered alarms Batman had to spend hours disarming, detailed an ecological terrorist who believed humanity was a cancer that must be cut away to save the Earth. But it was the meeting with Talia that changed everything. She walked into a Wayne Enterprises charity gala like she owned, not just the room but the very concept of elegance. Talia al Ghul, though Bruce did not know her name yet, wore a dress the color of midnight emeralds and moved through Gotham's elite with the confidence of someone who had dined with emperors and dismissed kings. Her eyes found Bruce across the crowded ballroom, and in that glance he saw intelligence that matched his own, danger that thrilled him, despite every instinct screaming warnings, and something else, loneliness. The loneliness of someone who lived in a world of masks and could never remove her own. They spoke for hours, dancing between conversations about art and philosophy, each probing the other's defenses with the delicacy of surgeon's blades. She knew things about him that no one should know. She referenced his time in the mountains of Asia with casual precision. She quoted philosophers he had studied under teachers whose names he had never spoken aloud. And when the gala ended, when the last guests departed and they stood alone on the terrace overlooking Gotham's glittering skyline, she finally revealed the truth. "My father wants to meet you properly," she said. Not as Batman intercepting shipments in the dark, but as Bruce Wayne, the man who has spent his entire life preparing for a war he does not yet understand. He is fighting. Bruce kept his expression neutral, the playboy billionaire mask firmly in place, but his mind raced. "Who is your father?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Talia smiled. And in that smile he saw her father's calculated danger, wrapped in genuine affection. A man who has lived longer than nations, who has built and destroyed civilizations, who has been fighting to save this world since before your country existed. He calls himself Ra's al Ghul, but you may call him the man who will either become your greatest ally or your eternal enemy. The choice, detective, is entirely yours. She walked away, leaving Bruce alone with the implications crashing through his carefully constructed worldview. Someone knew his identity. Someone had resources that dwarfed even Wayne Enterprises. And someone believed that Bruce Wayne, that Batman, was important enough to recruit personally. The question that kept Bruce awake for the next 72 hours was simple and terrifying. What could possibly require the Batman's help that an immortal terrorist with unlimited resources could not accomplish alone? The answer came with an invitation delivered by a child. The girl was perhaps 7 years old, standing in Crime Alley at midnight, exactly where Bruce's parents had died decades ago. She should not have been there. No child should be in Crime Alley after dark. But she stood in the exact spot where Thomas and Martha Wayne had fallen, holding a sealed envelope, waiting with the patience of someone 3 times her age. Batman dropped from the rooftops, landing silently behind her. But she did not flinch. She simply turned, handed him the envelope, and spoke in a voice trained to perfection. "Master Ras Al Ghul requests your presence at the following coordinates. He says to tell you that if you wish to understand why your parents truly died, you will come alone. If you bring allies or tracking devices, you will learn nothing. The choice is yours, detective. But my master suggests you choose wisely. Some truths, once missed, never offer a second chance." Before Batman could respond, before he could ask a single question, the girl pressed a button on a device in her palm. Smoke erupted around her, thick and green and smelling of chemicals Batman's cowl filters struggled to process. When the smoke cleared 3 seconds later, the girl was gone, vanished in the heart of Gotham, in the most monitored square blocks of the city, without leaving a trace. Batman analyzed the smoke residue, tracked air currents, reviewed every camera in a 6-block radius. Nothing. The League of Assassins had just demonstrated they could operate in his city, take his children if they wished, and disappear like ghosts. The envelope contained coordinates to a location in the mountains outside Gotham, abandoned monastery that records showed had been empty for 50 years, and a single sentence written in the same perfect calligraphy as before. "Your war against crime is noble, detective. But what if crime is merely a symptom of a disease that cannot be cured without burning the patient alive? Come, and I will show you what justice really costs." Bruce spent 2 days investigating Ras Al Ghul, pulling every resource Wayne Industries possessed, calling in favors from intelligence agencies across the globe, hacking databases that governments swore did not exist. What he found terrified him more than any villain he had ever faced. Because Ras Al Ghul was not insane, his methods were monstrous, his body count staggering, his goals apocalyptic. But his logic was flawless. His arguments were sound. His evidence was irrefutable. The world was dying. Humanity was a plague. And every day Batman saved another criminal. Every day he stopped another scheme. He was simply delaying the inevitable extinction that Raz had spent centuries trying to prevent. On the 3rd night, Batman went to the monastery alone. Chapter 2. The Test of Centuries. The monastery clung to the mountainside like a corpse, refusing to fall, its stone walls weathered by centuries of wind that howled through the peaks with voices that sounded almost human. Batman approached on foot. Having left the Batmobile 15 miles down the mountain, his every sense alert for ambush, for traps, for the 1,000 ways this could be his final night. The moon hung full and cold above, casting shadows that moved wrong, that seemed to watch his progress with ancient patience. No lights burned in the monastery windows. No sound emerged except the wind and the distant cry of something that might have been an eagle, or might have been something else entirely. The front gate stood open, an invitation or a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. Inside, the monastery had been transformed. What should have been dust and decay was instead a palace suspended between eras. Tapestries from dynasties that fell before America was conceived hung beside technological displays that made Wayne Industries look primitive. Weapons lined the walls, swords and spears and implements of death from every culture humanity had ever produced, each positioned with the reverence of religious artifacts. And everywhere, the smell of incense mixed with something medicinal, something that made Batman's head swim slightly despite his cowl's filtration systems. Ras Al Ghul sat in the center of the great hall, cross-legged on a cushion, before a chessboard carved from jade and obsidian. He did not look up as Batman entered. His fingers moved a piece, a knight, with casual precision. "Your move, detective," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space, "though I suspect you already know this game began long before you arrived." Batman, remained standing, analyzing exits, counting the shadows where assassins certainly hid, calculating the odds of survival if this turned hostile. He had faced death before, had walked into traps designed by the world's most cunning criminals. But something about this felt different. This felt like standing before a judge who had already deliberated for lifetimes and reached a verdict Batman could not appeal. "You know who I am," Batman said. Not a question, but a statement. Testing the waters. Raz smiled, finally looking up, and his eyes held the weight of centuries. "I know you are Bruce Wayne, son of Thomas and Martha, heir to a fortune built on the bones of Gotham's working class. A man who watched his parents die and decided the solution was to dress as a bat and punch the symptoms while ignoring the disease. Yes, detective. I know exactly who you are. The question is whether you know who I am." Batman said nothing, waiting, an interrogation technique he had perfected over years of making criminals confess in the silence. Raz stood, moving to the wall where a map of the world hung, marked with pins of red and green and black. "I was born in the desert, 643 years ago," he began, his finger tracing routes across continents. "The exact location no longer matters. The tribe no longer exists. The language I spoke as a child is dead and forgotten. I was a physician, detective, a healer. I dedicated my life to curing the sick, to easing suffering, to making the world better one patient at a time. And then the plague came." He touched a black pin in what might have been ancient Arabia or North Africa. "I watched 90% of my city die in 3 months. I worked without sleep, mixing every remedy I knew, praying to gods I did not believe in, begging the universe for answers. And I found one, deep in a cave system beneath the desert. I discovered a pool of chemicals, naturally occurring, that could heal any wound, cure any disease, reverse even death itself. I tested it on animals, on the dying who volunteered, and finally, when the plague took my wife, my children, my entire world, I used it on myself." Ray's turned back to Batman, and in his eyes was a pain so vast it made Bruce's childhood trauma seem like a paper cut. "The Lazarus Pit brought me back, but it did not bring back my family. I spent the next decade searching for other pits, other sources, trying to recreate the formula, and I succeeded. I have died 47 times, detective. 47 times I have been murdered, poisoned, aged into dust, and 47 times the Lazarus Pit has dragged me back, screaming. Do you know what that does to a mind? Do you know what it means to remember dying over and over, to feel your soul tear free, and then be yanked back into flesh that rejects it?" Batman's jaw tightened behind his cowl. If this was meant to generate sympathy, it was failing. "I have investigated you," he said, his voice hard as Gotham concrete. "You have killed thousands. Governments toppled. Populations culled. Entire regions destabilized because you decided they were better off dead. You are not a victim. You are not a victim. You are a monster with a tragic origin story." Reyes laughed, the sound sharp and genuine. "Good. I would be disappointed if you simply accepted my narrative. You think like a detective, which is why you passed the first test. But let me show you something before you judge too harshly." He pressed a panel on the wall, and the room transformed. Holographic displays erupted around them, showing data streams, population graphs, ecological reports, projections that spiraled toward catastrophe with mathematical inevitability. Raz moved through the information like a conductor, leading an orchestra of doom. In 1492, when Columbus sailed to your Americas, the global population was 400 million. Today it is 8 billion. In my lifetime, detective, Humanity has multiplied 20-fold. Do you understand what that means? Do you grasp the implications? We are consuming resources faster than the planet can regenerate them. We are producing waste that will poison the Earth for 10,000 years. We are driving species to extinction at a rate not seen since the meteor that killed the dinosaurs. And every day, every single day, we add 200,000 more mouths to feed, more bodies demanding water and food and energy that simply does not exist. The projections showed timelines. By 2050, water wars that would kill billions. By 2070, temperatures that would render equatorial regions uninhabitable. By 2100, cascading ecological collapse that would reduce humanity to scattered survivors fighting over scraps in a dead world. The data came from thousands of sources, universities and governments and research institutions, all pointing to the same conclusion. Humanity was dying, and the death would be neither quick nor clean. Batman studied the information, his detective mind cataloging the sources, verifying the math, searching for flaws in the logic. He found none. "This is not new information," he said finally. "Climate scientists have been warning about this for decades. The solution is not genocide. The solution is changing how we live, developing sustainable technologies, working together to solve the problem." Raz waved a hand, dismissing the displays. "I have tried that, detective. For 6 centuries I have tried that. I have funded research, supported governments committed to change, assassinated leaders who stood in the way of progress, manipulated markets to favor green technology. And do you know what happened? Nothing. Humanity does not change. Humanity cannot change. Because the problem is not the systems we have built. The problem is us, our nature, our fundamental inability to prioritize long-term survival over short-term comfort." He moved closer to Batman, his presence filling the space between them with intensity that made the air feel heavy. "I have watched empires rise and fall, detective. I have seen humanity at its best and worst. And I have learned a truth that you, in your brief decades, have not yet grasped. We are a cancer. A beautiful, creative, occasionally noble cancer. But a cancer nonetheless. And the only way to cure cancer is to cut it out before it kills the host." Batman's fists clenched. "So your solution is to murder billions, to play God and decide who lives and dies. That is not justice. That is evil hiding behind mathematics." Raz smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Is it evil to amputate a gangrenous limb to save the patient? Is it evil to kill one person to save 10? These are not new questions, detective. Philosophers have debated them for millennia. The difference is I have the courage to act on the conclusion while others hide behind moral cowardice and call it virtue." Before Batman could respond, before he could articulate the rage building in his chest, doors opened around the hall, and they were no longer alone. Dozens of figures emerged from the shadows, men and women dressed in the black and green of the League of Assassins, their movements synchronized with military precision, their eyes showing devotion that bordered on religious fervor. They formed a circle around Batman and Raz, not threatening but present, a demonstration of power that needed no words. And at the front, descending a staircase with grace that made the world slow down, came Talia. She wore combat gear now, practical and deadly, her hair pulled back to reveal a face that combined her father's dangerous intelligence with something softer, something that looked at Batman with an expression he could not quite read. She stopped beside Raz, placing a hand on his shoulder, the gesture intimate and possessive. "My daughter," Raz said, pride evident in his voice. "My greatest achievement. Trained from birth to lead the League. Educated in 17 languages. master of 42 forms of combat, holder of degrees from universities across the globe under a dozen different names. She is what humanity could become if we were not drowning in our own mediocrity. Talia met Batman's eyes, and in that moment something passed between them that had nothing to do with her father, or the League, or the philosophical debate about humanity's future. It was recognition. Two people who lived in masks, who carried burdens no one else could understand, who were fundamentally alone in crowds of admirers. It was dangerous, and complicated, and entirely inappropriate, given the circumstances. Bruce felt it anyway. "Father wants to know if you will join us," Talia said, her voice carefully neutral. "He has been preparing for this conversation since he first learned of your existence. You are the first person in 300 years he has offered a position beside him rather than beneath him." Batman looked around the hall, at the assassins who could kill him before he took 3 steps, at the technology that represented resources beyond even Wayne Industries, at Ra's al Ghul, who stood like a king in his court, and at Talia, who watched him with eyes that held both warning and hope. Every tactical instinct screamed that he was outmatched, outmaneuvered, standing in the heart of enemy territory with no backup and no clear escape route. He straightened, meeting Raz's gaze with the unwavering certainty that had made him Batman. "No," he said simply. "I will never help you kill billions. I will never accept that mass murder is the solution to any problem. And if you try to implement your plan, I will stop you." The hall fell silent. The assassins tensed. Raz stared at Batman with an expression that might have been disappointment, or might have been approval. Then he laughed, the sound genuine and rich, echoing off the ancient stones. "Good," Ray said, moving to the chessboard and tipping over his own king. "This too was a test. Detective, if you had said yes, if you had been seduced by the logic or the power or my daughter's considerable charms, I would have killed you myself. Because a man who abandons his principles when challenged is not worthy of them. You passed, which means the real game can now begin." Batman's mind raced, recalculating everything. This entire encounter had been theater, a performance designed to measure him, to understand how he thought, to map the boundaries of his morality. But why? What could Ra's al Ghul possibly gain from recruiting someone who would never agree with his methods? Raz returned to the map, his finger tracing lines across oceans. "I do not need your agreement, Detective. I need your opposition. Because in 13 days, I am going to release a biological weapon in Gotham City that will kill half its population. The toxin is already in place, distributed through systems your authorities do not even know exist. And you, Batman, are going to try to stop me. You will use every resource, every skill, every trick you have learned in your crusade against crime. And you will fail." The words hit like physical blows. Batman surged forward, but assassins moved faster, blades appearing in hands, crossbows aimed with lethal precision. Raz held up a hand, stopping them, his eyes never leaving Batman's. "This is not a threat, Detective. This is an opportunity. I am giving you 13 days to prove me wrong. 13 days to demonstrate that humanity can save itself, that your way of justice and redemption and hope can triumph over cold mathematics. If you stop me, if you save your city, I will accept that perhaps I have been wrong for 6 centuries. I will dismantle the League, destroy the Lazarus Pits, and let nature take its course with my ancient body. But when you fail, when Gotham burns despite your best efforts, you will finally understand that I am right. And perhaps then, standing in the ashes of everything you fought to protect, you will be ready to hear what I really want from you." Batman's voice was ice. "What do you want?" Raz smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. The warmth of a teacher who has finally found a worthy student. I want you to succeed me, detective. I want you to become the next Raz Al Ghul, because I am tired, so tired of carrying this burden alone. I have lived too long, seen too much, and I need someone who understands both the necessity of what must be done and the horror of doing it. Someone who will make the hard choices I have made, but do it with the humanity I lost centuries ago. You are that man. You just do not know it yet. The monastery erupted into chaos as Batman moved, but even as he fought, even as he deployed every gadget and technique to create an opening for escape, a part of his mind was already racing ahead, calculating how to save Gotham, how to find the weapon, how to prove Ras Al Ghul wrong. He did not see Talia watching him fight her father's assassins with an expression that mixed admiration and sorrow. He did not see the single tear that traced down her cheek before she wiped it away and joined the fight herself. Batman escaped the monastery 3 hours later, bleeding and exhausted, carrying information he had stolen from Rass's computers and fragments of the toxin formula he had managed to obtain during the chaos. As he descended the mountain, as dawn broke over Gotham in the distance, one thought consumed him. He had 13 days to save 4 million people, and for the first time in his career, as Batman, he was not certain he could win. Chapter 3. The Poison Garden. Gotham never slept, but some nights it pretended, holding its breath in the hours before dawn, when even criminals grew weary and contemplated rest. Batman returned to the Batcave at 4:17 in the morning, his cape torn, 3 ribs cracked, and carrying a vial of green liquid that could represent the deaths of millions. Alfred met him at the entrance, medical kit already prepared, his expression managing to convey both relief and stern disapproval without saying a word. "The toxin," Bruce said, handing over the vial before collapsing into the analysis chair. "I need a full breakdown within 6 hours. Chemical composition, dispersal vectors, potential antidotes, and Alfred." He paused, his cowl finally coming off to reveal Bruce Wayne's face, drawn with exhaustion and something deeper, something that looked like doubt. "We may not have enough time." Alfred took the vial with hands that had steadied through 2 wars and 30 years of watching Bruce throw himself at impossible odds. "Then, we shall work efficiently, Master Bruce. But first, those ribs need wrapping, and you need 4 hours of sleep, or you will be useless to anyone. Even Batman cannot operate on willpower alone." Bruce wanted to argue, wanted to dive immediately into research, wanted to justify the panic clawing at his chest with productive action. But Alfred was right. He was always right. Bruce allowed himself to be patched, to swallow the pain medication he normally refused, and to stumble to the small bedroom hidden in the cave's deepest recesses. He set an alarm for 3 hours, a compromise Alfred would accept, and closed his eyes, expecting nightmares. Instead, he dreamed of Talia. She stood in a garden that existed nowhere on Earth, flowers blooming in impossible colors, their fragrance sweet and deadly. And she was crying, not the delicate tears of movies, but the ugly, gasping sobs of someone whose heart was being torn in directions it could not stretch. Bruce tried to reach her, but the garden path stretched longer with every step, and her voice calling his name grew fainter until he woke with her final words echoing in his mind. "You cannot save everyone, beloved. Eventually you must choose who dies." The analysis was waiting when he returned to the computers, and it was worse than he feared. Alfred had worked with samples. Batman had sent to trusted contacts in biochemistry, people who owed Bruce Wayne favors and would not ask questions. The toxin was a masterpiece of biological warfare, a chimera combining elements of every plague and poison known to science with additions that should not exist. It targeted specific genetic markers, would lie dormant for days before activation, and once released would spread through water, air, and contact with efficiency that made Ebola look amateurish. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that Batman's analysis software had identified components that matched exactly to a research project from 15 years ago. A project funded by Wayne Biotech, one of Bruce's own subsidiary companies, research into regenerative medicine that had been shut down when the lead scientist went rogue. Dr. Simon X had vanished with samples and notes, and despite years of searching, Batman had never found him. Until now. Because Dr. X had clearly been working for Ra's al Ghul, using Wayne's money and resources to develop the very weapon that would now destroy Gotham. Bruce felt the irony, like a knife between his ribs. His own company, his own fortune built by his father to help Gotham, had funded the instrument of its destruction. Raz had not just demonstrated his reach, he had forced Bruce to confront his complicity. Every dollar the Wayne family had made, every technological advance, every good intention had been infiltrated and corrupted. The poison that would kill Gotham had been paid for by the man trying to save it, Master Bruce. Alfred said quietly, standing at his shoulder. "This is not your fault. You could not have known." Bruce stared at the chemical formula rotating on screen. "Could I not have? Yanwinlud. How many other projects have I funded without oversight? How many scientists has Wayne Industries employed without proper vetting? Res is right about one thing. We build systems meant to help, and those same systems become weapons in the hands of people willing to use them. Self-flagellation is unproductive." Alfred replied, his voice carrying steel beneath the politeness. "You have 11 days remaining. Focus on solutions, not blame." Bruce nodded, pushing the guilt down into the dark place where he stored all the emotions that interfered with being Batman. The toxin was sophisticated, but it had weaknesses. It required specific conditions to remain stable, needed a dispersal method that could reach the entire city simultaneously, and had an activation trigger that the formula suggested was environmental rather than chemical. If he could identify the dispersal method and neutralize it before activation, Gotham would be saved. He spent the next 18 hours becoming an expert in water treatment facilities, air circulation systems, food supply chains, and every other vector through which a toxin could be introduced to a city of 4 million people. He created models, ran simulations, deployed sensors across Gotham monitoring for chemical anomalies. He contacted Barbara Gordon, now Oracle, and asked her to monitor all city systems for unusual activity. He brought Dick Grayson back to Gotham, needing Robin's help to cover more ground than Batman could alone. He did everything right, everything his training and experience suggested, and he found nothing. Imperi. By day 8, Bruce was operating on 2 hours of sleep per night, fueled by stimulants that made his hands shake and his heart race irregularly. He had investigated 14 false leads, stopped 3 unrelated crimes because he happened to be in the area, and was no closer to finding Raz's weapon than when he started. Worse, he was beginning to suspect that Raz had been honest about the timeline, that this was not a bluff or a test with a hidden safety net, that in 5 days, Gotham would begin dying, and Batman would watch helpless as his city suffocated. On day 9, Talia found him on a rooftop overlooking Gotham Harbor. She approached from downwind, silent as falling snow, and only spoke when she was close enough that he could have touched her. "You are searching in the wrong places, beloved. My father does not think like a terrorist planting a bomb. He thinks like a doctor treating a patient. You are looking for the infection when you should be looking for the treatment." Batman spun, batarang in hand, but did not throw it. Talia stood with her hands visible and empty, wearing civilian clothes, looking nothing like the deadly assassin he had seen in the monastery. She looked tired too, he realized. Tired and sad and carrying a burden that bent her shoulders despite her perfect posture. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice harder than he intended. "Why tell me anything if your father wants me to fail?" Talia moved to the roof's edge, looking out at the city lights, reflecting on black water. "Because I do not know what I want anymore," she said, her voice barely audible above the wind. "I was raised to believe in my father's mission, raised to see humanity as a plague, and the League as necessary medicine. But then I met you, and I see how you fight for this city, how you refuse to give up on people who have given up on themselves. And I wonder if perhaps my father has been wrong, if perhaps 600 years of life has made him forget what it means to be human." Batman remained silent, instinct screaming, warnings, even as something in him wanted to believe her, wanted to close the distance between them, wanted to trust that she was as conflicted as she appeared. It was a trap. It had to be a trap. Everything about this situation was designed to manipulate him, to make him doubt, to paralyze him with moral complexity when he needed clarity and action. Talia turned back to face him, and in the dim light, her eyes shone with unshed tears. "The treatment," she said again. "My father has spent centuries developing countermeasures to every disaster he has engineered. He believes in balance, in having the cure before releasing the disease. The toxin in Gotham is not in your water or your air or your food. It is in your medicine. Specifically, in the flu vaccines that were distributed to every clinic, every hospital, every school 3 months ago. A vaccine that your Martha Wayne Foundation paid for and provided to the city's poor for free." The words hit like bullets, each one tearing through Batman's carefully constructed defenses. The vaccine program had been Bruce's idea, a way to honor his mother's memory and provide health care to neighborhoods that could not afford it. 70,000 doses distributed across Gotham. 70,000 people who had been trying to stay healthy, who had trusted Wayne money to help them, now carrying a death sentence in their bloodstream. "How do I stop it?" Batman asked, his voice steady, despite the rage and horror churning in his gut. "What is the activation trigger?" The Scimitia, the Talia, reached into her jacket, slowly, withdrew a small device that looked like a modified phone, and held it out to him. "Ultraviolet radiation at a specific frequency. The toxin remains inert until exposed to UV light at precisely 412 nanometers. My father has positioned emitters across the city, disguised as new street lights installed by a shell company that won the municipal contract 6 months ago. In 4 days, those lights will activate on an automated schedule, and everyone who received the vaccine will die within 6 hours. Batman took the device, his mind already racing through solutions. Destroy the emitters, shut down the power grid, create a counter-frequency that neutralizes the activation, develop an antidote and distribute it to the 70,000 affected people. Each option presented problems, time constraints, impossible logistics, but options nonetheless. He could do this. He could still save Gotham. "Thank you," he said to Talia, meaning it, despite his suspicions. "Why help me? Why betray your father?" Talia smiled, and it was the saddest expression Batman had ever seen. "Because I love you," she said simply, "and because I love my father. And I do not know which love is stronger, which cause is more just, which future I want for this world. So I am giving you the information you need to save Gotham. And when you do, when you prove that humanity deserves to survive, perhaps I will finally know where I belong." She moved then, faster than Batman could react, closing the distance between them and kissing him with desperate intensity that tasted like goodbye and promises neither could keep. When she pulled away, she was crying openly, tears streaming down her face as she backed toward the roof's edge. "There is something else you should know," she said, her voice breaking. "The information I just gave you is correct. But there is a second trigger my father did not tell me about. A failsafe, in case someone tries to stop the primary activation. I do not know what it is, beloved. I do not know where it is. But my father has been alive for 6 centuries by always having a backup plan. Whatever you do to save Gotham, know that it will not be enough. He has already won. He is simply giving you hope. So the despair will be more complete when you fail." Before Batman could respond, before he could process the implications, Talia stepped backward off the roof, falling into the darkness below. Batman lunged forward, grapnel already firing, but she had anticipated his response. Smoke erupted around her falling form, thick and concealing, and when it cleared she was gone, vanished into Gotham's shadows, leaving Batman alone with information that might save the city, and the certainty that Ra's al Ghul had planned for even this betrayal. Chapter 4. The Choice That Breaks Heroes. 3 days, 16 hours, and 42 minutes remained when Batman assembled his team in the Batcave. Dick Grayson stood in his Robin costume, younger then, but already showing the leadership that would one day make him Nightwing. Barbara Gordon attended via video link, her Oracle systems displaying maps and data streams across multiple screens. Alfred monitored medical channels, prepared to coordinate with hospitals when the crisis came. And Bruce, as Batman, stood before them explaining a threat they could barely comprehend and a solution that might cost everything. The emitters are positioned at 733 locations across Gotham, he explained, highlights appearing on the cave's tactical display. Destroying them all simultaneously would require resources we do not possess. Disabling the power grid would affect hospitals, life support systems, traffic controls. We would save 70,000 from the toxin and kill hundreds through infrastructure collapse. "So what do we do?" Dick asked, his young face set with determination that reminded Bruce why he had taken this boy in, why he had broken his own rule about working alone. "There has to be a way." Batman pulled up another display, this one showing chemical formulas and molecular structures. "Alfred and I have developed a potential antidote. Potential because we have had no time for proper testing. It could neutralize the toxin, or it could accelerate its effects, or it could do nothing at all. We cannot know without human trials, and we do not have the time or the ethics to experiment on people who do not know they are test subjects." The cave fell silent, the weight of impossible decisions pressing down on all of them. Barbara spoke first, her voice coming through the speakers with calculated calm. "What is the backup plan? You said Talia warned you about a second trigger. Do we have any leads on what that might be?" Batman's jaw tightened, the only outward sign of the frustration consuming him. "Nothing. I have analyzed every system Ra's could have infiltrated, searched for any pattern or signature that matches League operations. If there is a secondary trigger, it is hidden beyond even my ability to find it in the time remaining. We must proceed, as if the emitters are the only threat, and hope that Talia was wrong or lying to create additional psychological pressure." Or, Alfred interjected, his tone carrying centuries of British understatement. "We must accept that Master Ra's has outmaneuvered us, and focus on minimizing casualties rather than preventing them entirely." "No," Bruce said, the word coming out harder than intended. "We are going to save this city. All of it. Every person who received that vaccine will survive. I do not accept loss. I do not accept that evil can be too sophisticated to defeat. We find another way." Dick stepped forward, placing a hand on Batman's armored shoulder, a gesture of support that Bruce had not realized he needed. "Then, let me help. Give me a section of the city. Give me targets to disable. We work together, like always, and we beat this." Batman looked at his partner, at the boy he had trained, the child who trusted him completely to lead them through darkness into light. And in that moment, Bruce realized the trap Ra's had laid was even more sophisticated than he had understood. Because if Batman accepted help, if he distributed his team across Gotham to disable emitters, he would be putting them in danger from the secondary trigger he could not identify or defend against. Dick could die. Barbara could die. Alfred, coordinating medical responses, could be targeted by League assassins looking to maximize chaos. Everyone Bruce cared about would become vulnerable the moment he deployed them against Raz's plan. But if he refused help, if he tried to handle everything alone, he would certainly fail. 70,000 people would die. And it would be because Batman's paranoia and need for control had prevented him from accepting the assistance freely offered. He would prove Ross right, that heroes were too limited by their principles to make the hard choices necessary for victory. It was a perfect trap, and Bruce had walked into it blind. He made his decision with the cold calculation that had made him Batman, pushing aside Bruce Wayne's emotions and fears to focus on tactical necessities. The plan he outlined over the next hour was comprehensive, dangerous, and relied on timing so precise that a single mistake would cascade into catastrophic failure. Dick would take the east side, disabling emitters in Crime Alley and the Bowery. Barbara would coordinate from the clock tower, managing city systems and communications. Alfred would prepare the Batcave's medical facility for potential casualties, and Batman would handle the central network, the main power junction that controlled all 733 emitters, betting that he could shut down the entire system from a single location. It was the kind of desperate gambit Bruce had pulled off a dozen times before. It should have felt familiar, should have triggered the adrenaline rush that came with operating at the edge of human capability. Instead, it felt like surrender, like playing the game exactly as Raz had designed it, moving pieces across a board where every position was a trap, and every choice led to loss. On the final night, 16 hours before the emitters were scheduled to activate, Batman stood alone in the central power station beneath Gotham's financial district. He had sent his team to their positions, confirmed their equipment, made them promise to retreat at the first sign of League interference. He had done everything a good leader should do, and still he felt like he was sending them to their deaths. The power station hummed with electricity, transformers cycling gigawatts through cables thick as tree trunks, feeding a city that never stopped demanding more energy. Batman accessed the control systems, bypassing security that was laughable compared to the Batcave's networks, and found the emitter network exactly where his research suggested. It was almost insulting how easy this part was, how Raz had left the technological door unlocked, as if daring Batman to walk through and discover whatever trap waited beyond. He was entering the shutdown codes, watching the emitters begin their deactivation sequence across all 733 locations when Ra's al Ghul's voice spoke from the darkness behind him. "Well done, Detective," the ancient warrior said, his tone carrying genuine approval. "You found my toxin, identified the dispersal mechanism, developed an antidote, and assembled your team to counter my plan. You have performed admirably under impossible pressure. You have earned the right to the truth." Batman spun, weapons ready. But Raz stood alone and unarmed, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of scholarly patience. No assassins emerged from the shadows. No trap sprung shut. Just two men in a humming chamber beneath a city that hung in the balance between salvation and annihilation. "The truth," Reyes continued, gesturing to the computers, is that there is no toxin. The vaccines were vaccines, nothing more. The emitters are simply streetlights, installed to provide better visibility in high-crime neighborhoods and paid for by the same Wayne Foundation grants you are now frantically trying to undo. I lied to you, detective. I manipulated my daughter into betraying information that was designed to be betrayed. Because this entire exercise was never about killing Gotham. It was about proving that you cannot save Gotham, no matter how hard you try. Batman's mind reeled, processing the implications even as rage built in his chest. You subjected 70,000 people to fear and uncertainty, made them believe they were dying, made me believe I had failed them. Why? What could possibly justify that level of psychological terrorism? Raz stepped closer, his eyes burning with intensity that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with desperate hope. Because I needed you to understand what I face every day of my interminable existence. The weight of knowing that disaster is coming, that you can see it approaching with mathematical certainty, and that no one will believe you or help you until it is too late. You spent 13 days trying to save 70,000 people. Detective, I have spent 600 years trying to save 8 billion. Do you understand now? Do you grasp the magnitude of what I carry? Batman's fist crashed into Raz's jaw with enough force to shatter bone, but the ancient warrior rolled with the impact, accepting the violence as his due. Bruce hit him again and again, pouring months of frustration and fear and doubt into physical action, trying to beat out the terrible suspicion that Raz might be right. But Raz did not fight back. He simply endured until Batman's rage exhausted itself and Bruce stood over him, breathing hard, knuckles bleeding inside his gloves, staring down at a man who smiled, despite the blood running from his split lip. "You are not a monster," Batman said, the words coming out ragged. "You are a coward who hides behind philosophy and mathematics to justify the fact that you are afraid. Afraid that if you stop controlling, stop manipulating, stop playing God, the world might actually solve its problems without you. You do not want to save humanity. You want to own it." Raz laughed, the sound wet with blood and genuine amusement. "Perhaps you are right, detective. Perhaps I am simply a coward with delusions of grandeur. But answer me this. You spent 13 days believing 70,000 people would die, and you would have done anything to save them. Destroyed property, broken laws, sacrificed your own safety without hesitation. Now multiply that by 100,000. Now imagine the people dying are not hypothetical but guaranteed. Now imagine you have the power to prevent it, but only through means that society calls evil. What do you do, Batman? What do you do when heroism is not enough?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable, because any answer would be wrong. And in that moment, standing in a power station beneath a city he had just realized was never in danger, Batman understood the full scope of what Ra's al Ghul had done. This had not been a test of Batman's detective skills or his physical capabilities. It had been a test of his certainty, an attempt to make Bruce Wayne doubt the foundations of his crusade by forcing him to confront the limits of individual heroism in the face of systemic catastrophe. "I think," a new voice said from the chamber entrance, "that you have both missed the point entirely." Talia walked into the light, and she was carrying a device that Batman recognized instantly because he had helped design its principles years ago in a failed Wayne Tech project. A molecular destabilizer, capable of breaking down organic matter at the atomic level. A weapon so dangerous Batman had buried the research and sworn no one would ever build it. But clearly someone had. And clearly that someone had given it to Talia al Ghul. She pointed it at her father, her hand steady, her face expressionless. "I have listened to your arguments for 28 years, Father. I have studied your philosophy, trained in your methods, killed in your name, and I have come to a conclusion. You are right that the world is dying, but you are wrong about the solution. The problem is not humanity. The problem is men like you who think they are wise enough to make decisions for billions. Raz stood slowly, blood dripping from his mouth, his eyes showing surprise for perhaps the first time in centuries. Talia, he said gently, as if addressing a confused child. What are you doing? Talia's finger tightened on the trigger, and Batman realized with horrified clarity that she was actually going to do it, that she was going to murder her father, the only family she had, because she believed it was the only way to stop his crusade. And worse, she was going to do it in front of Batman, forcing him to either allow patricide or stop her and become complicit in whatever Raz did next. It was another test, another impossible choice, another demonstration that in the moral landscape Raz Al Ghul inhabited, there were no clean solutions, only shades of compromise, and the question of which principles you were willing to sacrifice, for which outcomes. Batman moved without conscious thought, his body reacting while his mind was still processing options. He struck Talia's wrist with a precise nerve strike, causing her hand to spasm and release the weapon. He caught the destabilizer before it hit the ground, secured it, and in the same motion placed himself between father and daughter, protecting both from each other. No, he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. This ends now. No more tests. No more philosophy disguised as terrorism. No more manipulating people's lives to prove points about human nature. Rez, you want to save the world? Then use your resources to fund clean energy, to support governments committed to change, to educate and inspire rather than cull and control. Talia, you want to stop your father? Then build something better than what he created. Prove that his methods are unnecessary by demonstrating alternatives work. But neither of you gets to kill today, not while I am here. Raz and Talia stared at him, then at each other, and something passed between them that Batman could not interpret. An understanding, perhaps, or an acknowledgement that they had pushed the detective as far as he could be pushed and learned everything they needed to know. Very well, Raz said finally, bowing his head in a gesture that might have been respect or might have been mockery. You have passed all my tests, detective. You have proven that your principles cannot be broken, your resolve cannot be shaken, and your naivete about human nature remains stubbornly intact. I believe we have nothing more to discuss. For now, he walked toward the chamber exit, moving past Batman and his daughter without fear or hesitation. But at the threshold, he paused, looking back over his shoulder. One final thought. Detective, you saved 70,000 people who were never in danger. But while you were focused on my imaginary toxin, 300 children died of preventable diseases in Southeast Asia. 4,000 people were displaced by floods in Bangladesh that your country's emissions helped cause, and 6 villages in Africa were wiped out by warlords fighting over water rights. You cannot save everyone, Batman. Eventually you must choose who lives and who dies by simple virtue of where you direct your finite attention. The only difference between us is that I admit it. Then he was gone, vanishing into Gotham's infrastructure with the ease of someone who had been infiltrating cities for longer than cities had been called cities. Batman did not pursue. There would be time for that later, time to dismantle the League, time to prevent whatever Ras was planning next. Right now, he needed to stand in this chamber with Talia and process the events of the past 13 days, needed to understand what he had learned and what it cost him. Talia picked up the destabilizer from where Batman had secured it, examining the weapon with professional interest. I was not really going to kill him, she said quietly. The device is not even charged. But I needed you to believe I would. Needed you to stop me, to choose protecting life even when that life belongs to your enemy. Father needed to see that, to know for certain that you are incorruptible. Batman turned to face her, studying the woman who had lied to him, manipulated him, and yet had also given him the tools to save Gotham from a threat that never existed. Why, he asked simply, why go through all of this? Why does it matter to your father whether I am corruptible or not? Talia moved closer, her hand reaching up to touch the side of his cowl with unexpected tenderness. Because he is dying, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The Lazarus Pits are losing their potency. Each resurrection takes longer, drives him deeper into madness, brings him back less than he was before. In perhaps 5 years, perhaps 10, he will die a final death, and the League will need a new leader. He has been testing you, beloved, because he wants that leader to be you. The revelation hit harder than any of Ra's physical or philosophical attacks. Batman, the symbol of justice and incorruptibility, being groomed to lead the world's premier organization of assassins and terrorists. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of long-term planning that Ra's al Ghul would consider elegant. I will never lead the League, Batman said. But even as he spoke the words, he wondered if that was entirely true. Because part of him, the part that had spent 13 days desperately trying to save people and failing to see the manipulation, understood the temptation. The League had resources that dwarfed the Justice League's capabilities. They had centuries of knowledge, global networks, the ability to act decisively without waiting for governments to debate and compromise. What could Batman accomplish with those tools at his disposal? How many more people could he save if he was not constrained by law and democratic process? The thought terrified him because it was seductive. Talia smiled sadly, as if reading his mind. That is what my father is counting on, she said. That eventually, after enough failures and compromises and situations where the rules prevent you from doing what is necessary, you will come to see his way as the only logical path. He is patient, beloved. He has forever. And you, despite your strength and conviction, are only human. Time will break you eventually. Time breaks everyone. She kissed him then, gentle and final. A goodbye that tasted of regrets and futures that would never exist. Then she too walked away, leaving Batman alone in the humming chamber, beneath a city that went on living, unaware how close they had come to nothing at all. Bruce Wayne returned to the Batcave as dawn broke over Gotham, exhausted and shaken in ways that had nothing to do with physical injury. Alfred was waiting, a cup of tea prepared, a blanket ready, the quiet support that had sustained Bruce through 1,000 dark nights. They did not speak. There were no words adequate to explain what had happened, what Bruce had learned, what doubts now lived in the corners of his mind, where previously only certainty resided. But as he sat in the cave's dimness, as the Bat computer cycled through news reports of a quiet night in Gotham, Bruce made himself a promise. He would never become Ra's al Ghul. He would never accept that mass murder was justified by mathematics. He would never lead the League of Assassins or betray the principles that made him Batman. But he would also never forget the questions Ra's had forced him to confront. Because ignoring hard truths was just another form of cowardice. And Batman, whatever else he was not a coward. The war with Ra's al Ghul had only just begun. And Bruce had a terrible feeling that it would only end when one of them was finally permanently dead. The question was, which one? And whether Batman could live with the answer. Chapter 5. The Son of the Demon. 2 years passed before Bruce Wayne saw Talia al Ghul again, and when he did, she was holding a baby. The meeting occurred in Nepal, in a monastery that predated written history, where Bruce had traveled following reports of a viral outbreak that matched League of Assassins' methodology. He found no virus, no plague, no evidence of bioterrorism at all. What he found instead was Talia sitting in a garden of mountain flowers, nursing an infant while monks moved around her with the reverence normally reserved for visiting deities. She looked different than Bruce remembered, softer somehow, despite the assassin's weapons visible beneath her flowing robes. More human, more vulnerable. She did not seem surprised when Batman emerged from the shadows. Still in costume, despite the sacred ground. She simply looked up, smiled with exhaustion that transcended physical tiredness, and gestured to the stone bench beside her. "Sit, beloved," she said, her voice carrying the weight of sleepless nights and decisions that could not be unmade. "Meet your son." The words took several seconds to process, to move from sound to meaning, to implication. Bruce remained standing, his tactical mind racing through possibilities, searching for the trap, the manipulation, the angle that would explain this as another of Ra's al Ghul's psychological operations. But Talia's expression held no deception, only truth. Terrible, complicated, world-altering truth. "His name is Damien," she continued, when Bruce did not move or speak. "He is 8 months old. He has your eyes and my father's temper, and is already demonstrating aptitude that frightens the trainers. I have kept him secret from you and from the League, but circumstances have changed. My father is planning something that will require every resource he possesses, and I cannot protect Damien alone. So I am giving you a choice. Bruce Wayne, take your son to Gotham and raise him in safety, away from my father's influence, or walk away now, and I will train him as a weapon, as I was trained, to continue the League's mission long after you and I are dust." Batman finally moved, sitting slowly on the bench, his eyes fixed on the infant who slept peacefully against his mother's chest. The baby looked normal, impossibly small and fragile, nothing like the threat Talia was describing. But Bruce could see it too, now that he knew to look. The bone structure that matched his own. The slight frown, even in sleep, that mirrored expressions Bruce had seen in mirrors for 30 years. The genetic proof that one night 2 years ago, when he and Talia had given in to attraction that defied every logical objection, they had created a life. "Why now?" Bruce asked, his voice rough behind the cowl. "Why tell me now, after keeping this secret for months?" "Because my father knows," Talia said simply. "He has always known. From the moment I conceived. He began planning how to use Damien, not as my son or your son, but as the perfect synthesis of Batman's tactical genius and League training, raised from birth to be the ultimate assassin and the heir my father always wanted. I thought I could prevent it. Thought I could hide him long enough to give him a childhood before the killing began. But my father has begun accelerating his timeline. The war he has been planning for centuries is finally starting, and he intends for Damien to be his general." She shifted the baby carefully, extending him toward Bruce with a gesture that felt ceremonial, like the passing of a crown or the signing of a treaty. "Take him," she said, tears now streaming freely down her face. "Take him, and teach him to be a hero instead of a weapon. Teach him that life has value beyond what it serves. Teach him to be the man I know you are, even when I am manipulated into fighting against you." Bruce took his son with hands that had disarmed bombs and stopped runaway trains, but had never held an infant before. Damien weighed almost nothing, was warm in a way that made Bruce's chest ache with protective instinct he had not known he possessed, and opened eyes that were indeed Bruce's own to stare up with infant confusion at the masked figure holding him. The baby did not cry, did not fuss. simply evaluated Batman with the seriousness of someone conducting an assessment, and apparently finding the results acceptable, reached up with one tiny hand to grip Bruce's finger with surprising strength. Something fundamental shifted in Bruce Wayne in that moment. Some wall he had built between himself and human connection developed its first irreparable crack, because this was not a cause he could quit, or a mission he could abandon. This was a person who existed because of choices Bruce had made, who deserved protection and love, and a chance at life beyond the wars his parents were fighting. This was the most important thing Bruce Wayne would ever be responsible for, and the weight of that responsibility made fighting crime seem simple by comparison. "You cannot stay with him," Talia said, reading Bruce's mind as she often did. "My father has eyes everywhere, and if you take Damian to Gotham while I remain with the League, he will know I betrayed him. You must make it appear as abduction, as theft. You must let me hunt you, fight you, curse you publicly for stealing my child. Only then will my father believe I remain loyal." Bruce looked at the woman who had just given him the greatest gift and the hardest burden simultaneously. "What is Raz planning?" he asked. "What war are you talking about?" Talia stood, moving to the garden's edge, where the monastery looked out over valleys that stretched to horizons colored purple by distance and altitude. "He calls it the Great Purification," she said, her voice carrying across the mountain silence. "A coordinated attack on every major population center simultaneously. Not a single city like Gotham, but 50 cities across 30 countries, all hit at once with plagues and poisons and weapons that will kill billions before governments can even coordinate a response. He has spent 2 centuries preparing, infiltrating governments and corporations, positioning resources and loyalists in every nation that matters. And when he launches his attack, there will be no Batman fast enough, no Justice League capable enough, no military strong enough to stop it." The scope of it staggered Bruce, even after years of knowing what Raz was capable of. Billions dead. Civilization collapsed. Humanity reduced to whatever fragments Raz deemed worthy of survival. It was genocide on a scale that made historical atrocities look like skirmishes. And if Talia was right, if the League had truly been preparing for 200 years, then stopping it would require more than heroism. It would require war. "When?" Bruce asked. "When does this attack begin?" Talia turned back to face him, and her expression held the bleakness of someone who had seen the future and found no hope in it. 3 years, perhaps 4. My father wants Damian old enough to remember what comes next, old enough to understand that the new world was built on necessary violence. He wants your son to witness the purification and accept it as right. That is why you must take him now, while there is still time to shape him into something other than what my father envisions." Batman stood, cradling his son against armor designed to deflect bullets, against a symbol meant to terrify criminals, against a chest that suddenly felt inadequate to protect something so precious. "I will stop him," Bruce said, with absolute certainty. "I will find his operation, dismantle his networks, prevent this attack before it begins. And I will do it while keeping Damian safe." Talia crossed the distance between them, reaching up to touch Bruce's face through the cowl, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with tenderness that made his breath catch. "I know you will try, beloved," she said softly, "and I will fight you every step of the way because I must maintain my cover. We will be enemies in public and allies in secret, and the line between those roles will blur until neither of us knows which is real. But know this, everything I do, every betrayal and every violence will be to protect our son and give you time to save a world that does not deserve saving." She kissed him then, one final time, and tasted like goodbye and promises that would inevitably be broken. Then she stepped back, drew a blade from beneath her robes, and slashed her own arm deep enough to bleed, but not deep enough to be fatal. She screamed, a sound of rage and violation that echoed across the mountains and brought monks running from the monastery. When they arrived, they found Talia bleeding and weeping, pointing at Batman, who held her child, telling a story of abduction and theft that would spread across the League's networks within hours. Batman ran, carrying his son through mountain passages that he had memorized years ago during his training, staying ahead of pursuit that he knew was coming. He made it to the Batplane hidden in a valley 10 miles distant, secured Damien in a makeshift carrier against his chest, and lifted off as League assassins emerged from the trees below. They fired but did not pursue, because this too was part of the plan. The story that would protect Talia and buy Bruce time to prepare for the war that was coming. During the flight back to Gotham, Batman became Bruce Wayne again, removing the cowl so his son would not spend the journey staring at a mask. Damien slept most of the way, occasionally waking to fuss before settling back into infant unconsciousness. Bruce found himself talking to the baby, explaining the world passing beneath them, making promises about the life they would build together. Promises he was not certain he could keep, but would die trying. Alfred was waiting when the Batplane landed in the cave, and his expression upon seeing the infant went through several rapid transitions before settling on resigned acceptance. The old butler approached slowly, examining Damien with the careful attention of someone evaluating a potentially explosive situation. "Master Bruce," he said finally, his tone managing to convey both congratulation and concern. "I believe we shall need to make some adjustments to the cave's safety protocols, and perhaps invest in soundproofing." Over the following months, Wayne Manor underwent transformations that would have baffled anyone who knew Bruce Wayne's public persona. A nursery was constructed in a secure wing, complete with surveillance systems that would make military installations jealous. The Batcave gained a section dedicated to childcare, because Bruce could not simply stop being Batman but also could not leave his son unattended. Dick Grayson, now operating as Nightwing and living in Bloodhaven, visited frequently and adapted to being an older brother with surprising grace. And Bruce Wayne, the man who had sworn to never let anyone close enough to become a liability, learned to change diapers and prepare bottles and function on sleep schedules that made his Batman patrols look restful. But always, underneath the domestic adjustments and the steep learning curve of fatherhood, Bruce was preparing for war. He investigated the League's operations with new urgency, tracking financial movements and weapons, shipments and personnel deployments that suggested Talia's timeline was accurate. He coordinated with the Justice League, sharing what he knew about Ra's al Ghul's plans, meeting skepticism from heroes who could not quite believe the threat was as vast as Batman described. And he watched his son grow, seeing in Damien's rapid development the genetic gifts that made him both extraordinary and terrifying. Because Damien was not a normal child. Even at 8 months, he was already demonstrating coordination that should take years to develop. By his first birthday, he was walking with balance that suggested either accelerated neural development or something else, something Bruce did not want to contemplate. Talia had said nothing about Lazarus Pit exposure during pregnancy, had said nothing about genetic modification or enhancement, but Bruce had to consider the possibility that his son was not entirely human, that Ra's had been planning this for longer than even Talia knew. The confirmation came on Damien's second birthday, when the child, playing in the manor's gardens under Alfred's supervision, killed a rabbit with his bare hands. Not accidentally, not in fear or confusion, but with methodical precision, breaking the animal's neck with a technique that required knowledge Damien should not possess. Alfred brought Bruce the small corpse, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly despite decades of wartime experience. "Master Bruce," he said quietly. "I believe we have a problem that extends beyond typical parenting challenges." Bruce held his son that night, the boy sleeping peacefully after Alfred had cleaned the blood from his hands, and felt fear that had nothing to do with physical danger. Because how do you raise a child who has been programmed from birth to kill? How do you teach compassion to someone whose instincts were shaped by league conditioning before he could even speak? How do you save your son from becoming the weapon his grandfather intended, when the weapon is already built and just waiting for someone to pull the trigger? The answer came 3 months later, when Talia appeared in Wayne Manor's gardens at midnight, moving through security systems like they did not exist, standing beside Damien's crib with an expression that combined love and regret in equal measure. Bruce found her there, his hand already reaching for weapons before he recognized her silhouette, his body relaxing only fractionally when he confirmed she was alone. "I have perhaps 6 minutes before my father's agents realize I am here," Talia said, not taking her eyes off the sleeping child. "So I will be direct." Damien was exposed to diluted Lazarus Pit essence during gestation, not enough to make him immortal, but enough to enhance his physical capabilities and burn knowledge directly into his developing brain. "My father has been conducting these experiments for decades, trying to create the perfect heir. Damien is his greatest success." Bruce moved to stand beside her, both of them looking down at the child who was innocent and weaponed simultaneously. "And to be undone?" he asked. "Can whatever Rast did be reversed?" Talia shook her head slowly. "The enhancements are permanent, woven into his DNA as thoroughly as your genetic contributions. But that does not mean Damien is doomed to become what my father intends. The Lazarus exposure gave him capabilities, but it did not determine his choices. You can still shape him, still teach him right from wrong, still give him the chance to choose heroism over assassination. It will be harder than raising a normal child. But when has anything worthwhile been easy?" She reached into the crib, gently touching Damien's hair, her fingers trembling with the effort of not simply taking him and running to somewhere the League could never find them. "I brought you something," she continued, withdrawing a small data drive from her pocket and pressing it into Bruce's hand. "Everything I have been able to steal about my father's great purification. Base locations, personnel files, weapons specifications, timeline projections. It is incomplete because he tells me less than he once did. But it is a start." Bruce took the drive, their fingers touching briefly, a connection that reminded him of what they had been before League obligations and Batman missions, and the impossibility of their situation had made them enemies. "Thank you," he said, meaning it for more than just the intelligence, for everything, for giving me Damien, for fighting your father from inside his organization, for being stronger than anyone should have to be. Talia smiled, and in the dim light she looked impossibly young, despite the weight she carried. "Do not thank me yet, beloved," she said, "because in 2 years, when my father launches his attack, I will be commanding the forces that try to kill you. I will hunt you across continents, fight you in streets and caves and places where only one of us will walk away. I will be the enemy you cannot bring yourself to kill, and the ally you cannot afford to trust. This is the role I must play to protect Damien's existence from my father's suspicion, and it will break both of us before this war is finished." She moved toward the window, preparing to vanish back into the night, but paused at the threshold. "One more thing," she said, looking back over her shoulder. "Tell Damien about me. Not the lies my father tells, and not the heroic fiction you might prefer. Tell him the truth, that his mother loves him more than life itself, but chose duty over maternal instinct, because some sacrifices are necessary to save the world. Let him hate me if he must, but let him understand that love and violence can coexist in the same heart, and sometimes the greatest love requires the hardest choices. Then she was gone, leaving Bruce alone with their sleeping son. And the crushing awareness that the next 2 years would determine not just Damien's future, but possibly humanity's survival. He plugged the data drive into the Batcave's computers and spent the rest of the night analyzing intelligence that confirmed his worst fears. The Great Purification was not a distant threat or a theoretical possibility. It was an imminent operation with operational budgets and personnel rosters and kill counts projected with accounting precision. 50 cities would be hit simultaneously. 2.7 billion deaths in the first week. Civilization's infrastructure collapsed within a month. Ra's al Ghul emerging from the ashes to rebuild according to his vision, a world of perhaps 2 billion people living in forced harmony with nature, governed by the League of Assassins with an immortal philosopher king at its head. It was insane and brilliant, and entirely achievable if Batman could not find a way to stop it. He had 2 years. 2 years to dismantle a conspiracy that had been building for 2 centuries. 2 years to prepare for a war against an enemy with unlimited resources and no moral constraints. 2 years to teach his son that killing was wrong, while knowing that Damien might need to become a killer to survive what was coming. Bruce Wayne had faced impossible odds before. He had stared into abysses that would have broken lesser men, and emerged still believing in justice and redemption, and the fundamental goodness of humanity. But this felt different. This felt like a battle he could not win, only delay, and the question was not whether he would succeed, but how many people he could save before inevitable failure. He looked down at the data drive in his hand, at the intelligence that represented Talia's betrayal of her father and her faith in Bruce's ability to use it effectively. He thought about his son sleeping upstairs, innocent and deadly, already carrying a burden he did not understand, and would spend his life trying to escape. He thought about Ra's al Ghul, 600 years old and utterly convinced that mass murder was mercy, counting down to a genocide he believed was necessary and just. And Batman made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would not just stop the Great Purification. He would end the League of Assassins. He would dismantle Ra's al Ghul's operation so thoroughly that it could never threaten the world again, and he would do it while keeping his son safe, while preserving whatever humanity remained in Talia's heart, while holding to principles that made him Batman instead of just another killer with good intentions. It was impossible. It was necessary. And it started now. Chapter 6. The League of Shadows. The first League base fell in Mongolia, a fortress disguised as a mining operation that had been processing biological weapons for 3 decades. Batman hit it at dawn with a precision that came from 6 months of surveillance, taking down 47 assassins without killing a single one, destroying enough viral samples to have wiped out Central Asia, and extracting intelligence that pointed to 17 other facilities. Ra's al Ghul called him personally 3 hours later. The conversation patched through on an encrypted line that appeared on every screen in the Batcave simultaneously. "Impressive, Detective," the ancient warrior said, his voice carrying admiration without anger. "You have declared open war. I had hoped for more time to prepare you, but perhaps necessity will be a more effective teacher than philosophy. Let us see how many of my operations you can destroy before the Great Purification begins. Consider it your final examination." The line went dead, leaving Bruce in silence that felt heavier than the conversation. Because this was exactly what Ra's wanted. Batman spreading himself across the globe, chasing facilities and weapons caches, destroying infrastructure that could be rebuilt while the real threat, the core of Raz's plan, remained hidden. It was the same strategy from the Gotham toxin test, forcing Batman to react while controlling the terms of engagement. Bruce was being played, and knowing it did not make him any less obligated to continue. Over the following year, Batman became something he had never been before. Not just a hero responding to crime, but a military commander, waging asymmetric warfare against an enemy with superior numbers and resources. He recruited allies carefully, bringing in heroes whose powers or skills matched specific targets, coordinating strikes across time zones and continents. Superman took down a League satellite network in one afternoon. Wonder Woman dismantled a training facility in Greece that had been operating since the original Olympics. The Flash evacuated civilian workers from a chemical plant in Venezuela before Batman destroyed it, preventing the League from using hostages as leverage. But for every base destroyed, intelligence suggested 2 more existed. For every assassin captured, 3 vanished into populations where facial recognition and conventional tracking failed. The League of Assassins had been building this network for 200 years, and Batman was trying to dismantle it in 2. The mathematics were not in his favor, and Ross knew it. The breaking point came in Thailand, in a facility that Batman's intelligence suggested was a major operations hub. He went in with Nightwing and Black Canary, 3 heroes against a compound that should have held 30 defenders. Instead, they found 400. The League had known they were coming, had reinforced the base specifically to trap them, and the ensuing battle lasted 6 hours, and left Batman with injuries that would have killed anyone without his training and equipment. They escaped, barely, and limped back to a safe house in Bangkok, where Bruce could feel his body shutting down despite Alfred's remote medical guidance and his own considerable pain tolerance. Nightwing paced the small apartment, furious and frightened in equal measure. "This is insane," Dick shouted, his hands clenched into fists. "We cannot win this way. Raz has too many resources, too many people, too many years of preparation. We need a different strategy." Bruce looked at his former partner through eyes that did not quite focus correctly, concussion symptoms, mixing with exhaustion to create a fog he could not think through. "What strategy?" he asked, his voice rough with fluid in his lungs. "We give up. We let billions die because the logistics are unfavorable. We tell the world that Batman tried his best, but the bad guy was too smart." And Dick knelt beside the cot where Bruce lay, his expression softening into something that looked like compassion mixed with frustration. "No," he said quietly. "We ask for help. Real help. Not just the Justice League showing up for individual missions, but a coordinated global response. We go to the United Nations, we go to governments, we go public with everything we know about Ra's al Ghul, and let the world defend itself instead of trying to be the only hero in a war that needs an army." The suggestion made tactical sense. Batman could not be everywhere, could not stop 50 simultaneous attacks, even with Justice League support. But going public meant admitting he had hidden this threat for 2 years, meant exposing intelligence methods and sources, meant trusting governments and institutions that Bruce had spent his career working around, because they were too slow, too compromised, too ineffective. It meant surrendering control in exchange for the possibility of greater impact. It also meant exposing Damian's existence to public scrutiny, meant answering questions about how Batman had a son with the daughter of the world's most wanted terrorist, meant putting his child in danger from every intelligence agency and criminal organization that would see Damian as leverage against Batman or as a valuable asset to be captured and exploited. The personal cost would be catastrophic. But 2.7 billion lives hung in the balance, and Bruce Wayne had not become Batman to protect his own comfort. He made the decision that would change everything. 3 weeks later, Batman stood before the United Nations Security Council in full costume, presenting evidence of the League of Assassins and the Great Purification that left diplomats pale and scrambling for responses. The briefing lasted 6 hours. covered operational details that Bruce had spent years compiling, and included testimony from former League members that Talia had secretly helped effect. By the time Batman finished, the world knew that Ra's al Ghul existed, that he commanded an army of assassins, and that he planned to kill billions within the year. The response was predictable: chaos. Some governments denied the threat, calling it vigilante fear-mongering. Others activated military protocols and began hunting League assets in their territories. The media exploded with speculation and conspiracy theories, talking heads debating whether Batman was a hero warning humanity or a manipulator creating fear to increase his own power. And in the middle of the storm, someone leaked Batman's identity. Bruce never confirmed how it happened. Whether it was an intelligence agency that had pieced together the evidence, or a League agent planting information to create chaos, or simply the inevitable result of standing in front of global cameras and speaking with patterns that voice analysis software could match to Bruce Wayne's public statements. But within 72 hours of the UN briefing, every major news organization was running stories about billionaire philanthropist Bruce Wayne living a double life as Gotham's masked vigilante. The revelation should have destroyed him. Wayne Enterprises stock dropped 40%. Board members called emergency meetings to remove Bruce from leadership. Former allies questioned every interaction they had ever had with him, wondering how much had been manipulation and how much had been genuine. Dick Grayson found himself answering questions about his own identity and whether he had been groomed or saved. And worst of all, reporters found Damian. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Bruce Wayne, as a 4-year-old son, with Talia al Ghul, heir to the League of Assassins. The child, Damian Wayne, has been kept hidden in Wayne Manor since infancy, presumably being trained as the next Batman, or the next heir to the League. Questions abound about the custody arrangement, about whether Bruce Wayne kidnapped the child, or whether Talia al Ghul willingly gave up her son to a man she is now publicly trying to kill. Child Services has been contacted. Investigations are pending. Bruce read the article in his study. While Damian played with wooden blocks in the corner, the boy blissfully unaware that his existence had just become international news. Alfred stood at the window, looking out at the reporters camped outside the manor gates. His expression carefully neutral, but his posture revealing tension. "Master Bruce," the old butler said quietly, "we need to consider relocating the young master. This level of exposure is untenable." Before Bruce could respond, before he could begin calculating how to protect his son from scrutiny and threat simultaneously, the television across the room switched on by itself. Ra's al Ghul's face filled the screen, transmitted simultaneously to every network via a hack that demonstrated the League's technical capabilities. The ancient warrior sat in a throne room that could have been anywhere, surrounded by masked assassins, looking directly into the camera with an expression that mixed disappointment and approval. "Detective," he began, his voice carrying across airwaves to reach every television and computer and phone on the planet. "You have done what I hoped you would do. You have taken a secret war and made it public. Force the world to acknowledge the threat I represent, and in doing so you have given me the greatest gift imaginable: legitimacy. For centuries I have worked in shadows, my actions dismissed as conspiracy theory or terrorist fantasy. But now, thanks to your testimony, the world knows I exist, knows I have the capability to do exactly what I promise, knows that when I speak with the weight of demonstrated power." Ras leaned forward, his eyes seeming to look directly at Bruce through the screen. "So let me speak clearly. In 6 months, on the spring equinox, the Great Purification will begin. 50 cities will be hit simultaneously with biological weapons that will kill half their populations within 1 week. Your governments cannot stop this. Your militaries cannot defend against attacks that will come from within, delivered by people you trust and systems you depend on. Your only hope, your only possible salvation, is to accept my terms." The screen changed, showing a map of the world divided into regions, each marked with population figures and resource assessments. "I do not want to rule your world," Rise continued. "I want to save it, and I will give you that chance. Reduce your global population voluntarily to 2 billion people through controlled measures over the next decade. Implement the environmental protocols I will provide. Accept League oversight of resource distribution and birth rates, and I will cancel the Great Purification. Refuse, and I will make the choice for you, but the method will be far less humane than what I am offering now." The broadcast ended, leaving millions of people staring at blank screens and trying to process what they had just heard. The world's most dangerous terrorist had just made a public ultimatum: submit to global dictatorship or face genocide. And the worst part, the part that made Bruce's hands shake with rage and frustration, was that Roz had taken Batman's public warning and turned it into a propaganda victory. The League was no longer a hidden threat to be dismantled. It was a known enemy making explicit demands, and now governments would have to respond not just tactically but politically. The following months were the most chaotic of Bruce Wayne's life. He coordinated with military forces, hunting League assets, provided intelligence to governments finally taking the threat seriously, and worked with the Justice League to prepare defenses for the 50 cities Ra's had targeted. But he also had to manage the public fallout of his revealed identity, fight legal battles over Damian's custody, and somehow maintain his son's safety while the world watched every move they made. Damian, for his part, adapted to the attention with unsettling ease. The boy seemed to understand that he was important, that cameras followed him wherever he went, that his behavior would be analyzed and judged by millions. He became careful in public, showing none of the violent instincts that sometimes emerged in private, playing the role of normal child with the skill of someone twice his age. It was simultaneously reassuring and terrifying, because it meant the League conditioning was deeper than Bruce had hoped. And Damian was already learning to manipulate public perception. The worst moment came, 3 months before the spring equinox, when Talia finally made her public move. She appeared on international news channels via the same hacking methods her father had used, but her message was directed not at the world but at one person. "Bruce Wayne," she said, her face filling screens across the globe. "You have stolen my son, turned the world against my family, and forced a conflict that could have been avoided through negotiation. I am coming to take Damian back, not as an assassin, not as a terrorist, but as a mother whose child was taken from her. And if you resist, if you try to keep him from me, I will show the world exactly what kind of man Batman really is." The statement was brilliant propaganda. It reframed the custody battle as maternal rights versus vigilante overreach. It made Talia sympathetic despite her League affiliation. It put Bruce in the position of either surrendering his son or appearing to be the villain keeping a mother from her child. And worst of all, it was not entirely a lie. Bruce had taken Damian without legal authority, had kept him hidden for years, and was now raising him in an environment that included training in violence and exposure to trauma that child services would absolutely consider abuse if they understood what happened in the Batcave. The custody hearing became an international spectacle. Lawyers argued about parental rights and child safety, and whether either Bruce Wayne or Talia al Ghul were fit parents given their respective activities. Damian testified via closed-circuit video, answering questions with careful precision that made him sound far older than 4, describing life in Wayne Manor without revealing anything about Batman operations or League training. And in the end, the judge made a ruling that satisfied no one and terrified everyone. Joint custody. Damien would spend half the year with Bruce Wayne and half with Talia al Ghul, with exchanges supervised by United Nations peacekeepers and both parents required to maintain the child's safety and education. It was a compromise that ignored the reality that one parent was Batman and the other was second in command of a terrorist organization planning to kill billions. But it was also legally defensible and politically expedient. A ruling that let the judge appear reasonable while punting the actual impossible decision down the road. Bruce knew immediately it was a trap. Knew that Ra's had orchestrated this outcome specifically to gain access to Damien, to begin the boy's formal league training, to corrupt whatever progress Bruce had made in teaching his son that killing was wrong. But he also knew that fighting the ruling would make everything worse, would create legal battles that distracted from stopping the Great Purification, would give Ra's exactly the chaos he wanted. So Bruce did something he had never done before. He surrendered. He let Talia take Damien for the first 6-month custody period, watched his son leave Wayne Manor in the company of UN peacekeepers and assassins disguised as bodyguards, and felt a part of his soul tear away as the convoy disappeared down the long driveway. Alfred stood beside him, a hand on his shoulder, saying nothing because there were no words adequate for this moment. That night, Batman returned to work with focus that bordered on obsession, because he had 6 months. 6 months before Ra's launched the Great Purification. 6 months before Damien returned, possibly corrupted beyond recognition. 6 months to accomplish what he had failed to do in 2 years. He would find Ra's al Ghul's primary base. He would locate the weapons that would kill billions. And he would stop the attack, even if it cost him everything. The war was reaching its endgame, and Batman was running out of time. Chapter 7. The Demon's Gambit. The League's headquarters was not where anyone expected. Not in some remote mountain fortress or hidden desert compound, but beneath the streets of Geneva, Switzerland, in tunnels that predated the city by 1,000 years. Batman discovered this through a combination of intelligence analysis, captured League communications, and a defector who traded information for protection before dying of poison that had been planted in her body years earlier as insurance against betrayal. The defector's final words, spoken through blood-foaming lips as Alfred tried desperately to save her, were coordinates and a warning. "He is waiting for you," she gasped. He has always been waiting. This was his plan from the beginning. Bruce stood in the Batcave 4 months after Damien's departure, staring at those coordinates, overlaid on maps, showing tunnel systems that Swiss authorities swore did not exist. Superman floated beside him, arms crossed, his expression skeptical. "You understand this is obviously a trap," Clark said, his voice carrying the gentle reason of someone trying to talk a friend away from self-destructive behavior. Ra's has been 3 steps ahead this entire time. Walking into his headquarters with the Great Purification weeks away is exactly what he wants you to do. Batman continued studying the maps, his mind running through scenarios and contingencies, calculating odds that were not favorable, but were better than doing nothing. "I know it is a trap," he said finally, "but it is also an opportunity. Ra's wants a confrontation, wants to show me something, or prove something, or break something inside me. That need, that ego, is the only weakness he has shown, and I intend to exploit it." The assault team assembled over the following week was the most powerful force Batman had ever coordinated. Superman for raw power, Wonder Woman for combat expertise, Green Lantern for versatility, the Flash for speed and evacuation capability if civilians were involved, Martian Manhunter for telepathic surveillance and coordination, and Batman himself because this was personal in ways that transcended tactics and strategy. They hit the Geneva tunnels at midnight, on a moonless night, descending through access points that Swiss military grudgingly provided after Batman shared intelligence about the League's presence beneath their neutral soil. The tunnels were ancient, carved from living rock by civilizations that predated recorded history, lit by bioluminescent fungi that cast everything in sickly green light. Water dripped from ceilings, lost in darkness above. The air smelled of earth and decay, and something else, something that reminded Bruce of the Lazarus Pit's chemical tang. The League was waiting 3 miles underground, in a cavern so vast it could have held a cathedral with room to spare. Thousands of assassins stood in perfect formation, their weapons drawn but not raised, their eyes hidden behind masks that reflected the green luminescence like demon faces. And at the center, seated on a throne that looked carved from a single emerald, sat Ras Al Ghul. Beside him, standing with the rigid posture of formal ceremony, was Damien. Bruce's heart stopped. His son, his 4-year-old son, who should have been playing with toys, or learning to read, or doing any of the normal things children did, stood dressed in League armor, sized for his small frame, a sword strapped to his back that he should not be able to lift, but clearly could. His eyes meeting Batman's across the distance with an expression that held no recognition, no love, no memory of the father who had raised him for 4 years. Just cold assessment, as if Bruce Wayne was a target to be evaluated rather than family to be acknowledged. "Welcome, Detective," Ras called out, his voice echoing through the cavern with casual authority. "I am pleased you accepted my invitation. I have been preparing this moment for a very long time. Allow me to introduce my grandson, Damien Al Ghul, heir to the League of Assassins and the next Demon's Head. You have had your time to influence him. Now he returns to his true purpose." Batman took a step forward, but Superman's hand on his shoulder stopped him, a reminder that they were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, and that rushing forward would accomplish nothing but getting them all killed. Bruce forced himself to breathe, to think tactically, despite every instinct screaming to grab his son and run. "What have you done to him?" he asked, his voice steady, despite rage that made his hands shake inside his gauntlets. Ras stood, moving down from his throne with the grace of someone who had been practicing regal bearing for centuries. "I have given him what you could not, Detective. Purpose, clarity, freedom from the moral confusion you call heroism. For 4 years you taught him that violence was wrong, that killing was never the answer, that justice meant capturing criminals and trusting broken systems to somehow reform them. For 4 months I have taught him the truth. That violence is a tool, that killing is sometimes the only solution, and that justice means making hard choices that weak men cannot stomach." He placed a hand on Damien's shoulder, the gesture possessive and proud. "Demonstrate what you have learned, grandson. Show the detective what you have become." Damien moved with speed that should have been impossible for a 4-year-old, drawing his sword and attacking the nearest assassin in the formation. The blade, impossibly sharp and wielded with impossible skill, cut through the assassin's defenses and opened a wound across his chest that bled but did not kill. The assassin collapsed and Damien stood over him, sword raised for a killing blow, waiting for permission or command. "Finish it," Ras said calmly. "Prove you understand that mercy is weakness, and hesitation is death." Batman lurched forward, Superman and Wonder Woman moving with him, but they were too far away, and Damien was too fast. The sword descended, and Bruce watched his son commit murder with the efficient grace of a trained killer. The assassin died without a sound, blood pooling on ancient stone, and Damien cleaned his blade on the corpse's clothing before returning to Raz's side, as if nothing significant had occurred. "Good," Raz said, genuine approval in his voice. "You are ready to lead the League when I am gone. Ready to continue my work across centuries. Ready to be the demon's head that Batman never had the strength to become." Bruce felt something break inside him, some fundamental hope that he could save his son from the darkness that had consumed Talia's childhood. Because that was not his child standing beside Ra's al Ghul. That was a weapon shaped like a boy, programmed to kill without hesitation or remorse, lost to conditioning that 4 years of love could not prevent, and 4 months of training had completed. He had failed. Failed as a father, failed as a hero, failed in the most important mission he had ever undertaken. The Justice League prepared for battle, powers manifesting as they readied to fight through 1,000 assassins to reach Raz and Damien. But Batman raised a hand, stopping them, because he finally understood what Raz wanted. This was not about the Great Purification. This was not about stopping Batman or killing the Justice League. This was about breaking Bruce Wayne so completely that he would finally accept Raz's philosophy, would finally agree that humanity was beyond saving, and that genocide was justified. "No," Batman said, his voice carrying across the cavern with authority that made even the assassins pause. "This is not real. Damien, I know you can hear me. I know your grandfather has been conditioning you, manipulating you, telling you that love is weakness and that I abandoned you. But none of that is true. I let you go because the court ordered it, and I have been fighting every day since to get you back, to save you from exactly this." Damien's expression did not change. The boy might as well have been carved from stone for all the emotion he displayed. But Bruce saw it, a tiny flicker in his son's eyes, a moment of confusion or recognition or doubt that suggested the conditioning was not as complete as Raz believed. Bruce clung to that flicker like a drowning man, grabbing driftwood, building his entire strategy around the hope that his son was still in there somewhere. "You killed that assassin because Raz told you to," Batman continued, taking another step forward, despite the 1,000 weapons now aimed at his chest. "But you hesitated for half a second before the blade fell. I saw it. You were deciding whether to obey or refuse, whether killing was right or wrong, whether you wanted to be a weapon or a person. That hesitation is what makes you human. Damien, that doubt is what separates you from the monsters your grandfather commands." Raz laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. Impressive rhetoric, detective. But words cannot undo months of proper training. Damien killed because killing is natural. Because humans are predators pretending to be civilized. Because your moral fairy tales cannot compete with biological imperative. He is mine now. Accept it and move forward, or cling to false hope and die here with your friends. Batman removed his cowl, standing before the League as Bruce Wayne, letting his son see his father's face instead of a mask. "I am not here to fight you," Bruce said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "I am not here to stop the Great Purification, though I will if I can. I am here for my son, and I am willing to trade everything I have, everything I am, for his freedom." The cavern erupted in murmurs, assassins exchanging glances, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. Fraz raised a hand for silence, his expression showing interest that might have been genuine. "Explain," he commanded. Bruce reached to his belt, slowly and with obvious movements, so no one would interpret it as reaching for weapons, and withdrew a small vial containing green liquid that glowed in the cavern's dim light. "This is the last viable sample of Lazarus Pit essence on Earth," he said. "I found it 3 months ago in an abandoned League facility in Morocco. You have been searching for it because your other pits are exhausted, because you are finally dying and this vial represents your only chance at resurrection. I will give it to you in exchange for Damien's release, his complete release from League obligations, and a guarantee that you will never attempt to contact or influence him again." The silence that followed was total. Every person in the cavern understanding they were witnessing a pivotal moment. The Raz stared at Bruce, with an expression that cycled through surprise, calculation, and something that might have been respect. "You would give me immortality," he said slowly, "to save your son. You would extend my life indefinitely, knowing that I will use that life to continue my crusade, knowing that every death I cause for the next 1,000 years will be partially your responsibility. That is the trade you offer." "Yes," Bruce said simply. Rez began to laugh, genuinely amused, for perhaps the first time in their long conflict. "Oh, detective, you have finally learned. You have finally grasped the fundamental truth I have been trying to teach. That principle must sometimes bow to necessity. That even Batman, incorruptible symbol of justice, will compromise his values when the stakes become personal. That you are no different from me, just less experienced and less honest about what you are willing to do." He descended from his throne, crossing the distance to stand before Bruce, his hand extended for the vial. "I accept your trade," he said. "Not because I need the Lazarus essence, though it is valuable, but because this moment, this surrender of your principles, is worth more than immortality. You have proven my point better than any argument. You have demonstrated that everyone breaks eventually, that love is the weakness I always claimed it was, and that when forced to choose between your son and your values, you chose your son. Welcome to moral compromise, detective. Welcome to being human." Bruce handed over the vial, watching Raz examine it with expert eyes, seeing the ancient warrior's expression shift from triumph to confusion to dawning horror. Because the liquid in the vial was not Lazarus Pit essence. It was a compound Alfred had developed, looking identical but containing nothing more than colored water and harmless chemicals. The real Lazarus sample, the one Bruce had found in Morocco, had been destroyed immediately. Because giving Raz al Ghul immortality was never an option, never a trade Bruce would actually make, never anything but a lie designed to create this exact moment. Before Raz could react, before he could call for his assassins to attack, Bruce moved, not toward Raz, but toward Damien, covering the distance with speed born of desperate paternal instinct, reaching his son and pulling him close despite the boy's struggles, despite the sword that opened a gash across Bruce's ribs, despite everything screaming that this was futile. "I lied," Bruce said, his voice carrying clearly, despite the pain. "I gave you nothing because you deserve nothing, but I wanted you to believe, for just a moment, that Batman had finally compromised, that your philosophy had won. Because that is your weakness, Reyes. Not resources, or planning, or longevity. Your weakness is ego. Your need to be right, to be validated, to convert others to your worldview, instead of simply acting on it. And that ego, that desperate need for approval, from the one man who consistently refuses to give it, is going to destroy you." The Justice League moved then, Superman and Wonder Woman engaging the assassin army with devastating effectiveness, Green Lantern creating barriers to protect Batman and Damien, Flash evacuating wounded before they could bleed out on ancient stone. Martian Manhunter's telepathic assault hit the League's command structure like a psychic bomb, disrupting coordination and creating chaos that turned ordered ranks into confused individuals. And in the middle of the battle, Bruce Wayne held his son and whispered truths that might not penetrate conditioning, but might plant seeds that would grow later. "You are my son," he said. "Not a weapon, not an heir to assassins, not a monster your grandfather created. You are Damian Wayne, and you have a choice about who you want to become. The training he gave you, the skills, the knowledge, those are tools. But tools serve the person wielding them. They do not determine your nature or dictate your choices. You can be a hero or a villain or anything in between, but you cannot be both innocent and complicit. You have to choose. Damian stopped struggling, his small body going rigid in Bruce's arms, his eyes meeting his father's with an expression that held too much understanding for a 4-year-old. You gave him a fake vial, the boy said, his voice flat and cold. You lied to make him believe you compromised. That was clever. Grandfather will respect that even as he tries to kill you for it. Bruce pulled back enough to look at his son properly, searching for humanity in those eyes that held his own genetic legacy and Ra's al Ghul's philosophical corruption. "Do you respect it?" he asked. "Do you understand why I did it?" Damian considered the question with seriousness that broke Bruce's heart. "You did it to save me," the boy said finally. "But I do not need saving. I am exactly what I was meant to be. What both you and grandfather made me through your competing influences. I know how to kill, and I know that killing is wrong. I have skills that require lifetimes to master, and I am 4 years old. I am a contradiction that should not exist, and I do not know if I will ever be able to choose between the two paths you and grandfather represent." It was the most honest thing Damian had ever said. The first crack in the conditioning that suggested Bruce's son was still in there, fighting to understand who he was beneath the programming. Bruce held him tighter, feeling the battle raging around them, feeling time running out as League reinforcements poured into the cavern from tunnels that seemed endless. The Justice League was powerful, but they were not infinite, and eventually sheer numbers would overwhelm them. "Then let me make it simple," Bruce said. "Let me give you one reason to choose heroism over assassination. Because I love you, Damian. Not for what you can do or who you might become. I love you because you are my son. And that is reason enough. Your grandfather loves you too, in his way. But his love is conditional on you becoming what he wants. My love is unconditional. And that difference, that single fundamental difference, is why you should choose me." Damian did not respond immediately, his expression cycling through emotions too complex for his age, processing information with a mind that had been enhanced by Lazarus exposure and corrupted by League training. But then, so quietly Bruce almost missed it beneath the sounds of combat, the boy spoke. "Take me home, father," he said. "Please take me away from here." Bruce activated the emergency extraction protocol, the signal that told his team to disengage and retreat. The acceptance that they would not stop the great purification today, but might save something more important. Superman grabbed both Bruce and Damian. Green Lantern created a shield that held back assassin blades and arrows. And the Justice League fought their way back through tunnels toward the surface 3 miles above. They left behind chaos and wounded, and an ancient warrior screaming rage that echoed through stone carved before humanity learned to write. They emerged in Geneva streets at dawn, battered and bleeding but alive, carrying a victory that felt hollow given what they had failed to accomplish. The great purification was still coming in 2 weeks. Ra's al Ghul was still alive, and more dangerous than ever. The League of Assassins remained intact and ready to execute genocide on a scale humanity had never experienced. But Bruce Wayne had his son back, and in that moment, holding Damian while the boy cried against his father's chest for the first time since leaving Wayne Manor, it felt like enough. It was not enough. Bruce knew that. In 2 weeks the world would burn unless he found a way to stop it. But for now, for just this moment, he would let himself believe that saving one person was as important as saving billions. That being a father mattered as much as being Batman. That love was not weakness, but the only strength that ultimately mattered. Ra's al Ghul had wanted to break Bruce Wayne, had wanted to prove that everyone compromises, everyone fails, everyone eventually accepts that evil is necessary. But standing in Geneva's dawn, holding his son while the Justice League provided security against League pursuit, Bruce finally understood something that had eluded him for years. Raz had been broken long ago, had been so thoroughly compromised by centuries of loss and resurrection and madness that he could no longer recognize the difference between strength and cruelty. The demon's head was not a monster to be defeated, but a tragedy to be ended, an immortal being who had forgotten how to die and therefore forgotten how to live. The war was not over. The final battle still lay ahead. But for the first time since this conflict began, Batman believed he could win, not through superior tactics or resources or planning, but through the simple, stubborn refusal to become what Ra's al Ghul insisted he must become. Through choosing love over expediency, hope over pragmatism, and the messy, complicated difficulty of being human over the cold efficiency of being a weapon. Damian looked up at his father, with eyes that held confusion and pain, and the first fragile shoots of trust beginning to grow. "Are we going to stop Grandfather?" he asked. "Are we going to prevent the great purification?" Bruce met his son's gaze and made a promise he did not know if he could keep. "Yes," he said. "We are going to stop him. Together. Because you know things about the League that I never could. And I need your help. Not as a weapon, but as my partner. As my son who chooses to be a hero, even though being a villain would be easier. Will you help me save the world?" Damian. The boy nodded, and in that nod was the beginning of redemption for both of them. The great purification would not happen. Ra's al Ghul would finally be stopped, and a 4-year-old who had been torn between two impossible legacies would start the long, difficult journey of becoming his own person. The war was entering its final phase, and this time Batman would not fight alone. Chapter 8. The Immortal's Endgame. The safe house in Prague was chosen for its anonymity, a forgotten apartment in a building scheduled for demolition, where Batman could plan humanity's salvation without worrying about League surveillance or government interference. Damian sat at a table too large for his small frame, drawing maps from memory of League facilities he had visited during his months with Raz, his hand moving with precision that belonged to a trained cartographer rather than a 4-year-old child. Bruce watched his son work, noting how the boy's fingers trembled slightly, how his eyes darted to the windows every few minutes checking for threats, how he had not slept more than 2 hours at a time since Geneva. The trauma would take years to heal. Bruce knew. Possibly decades. Possibly never. But right now they did not have time for therapy or recovery or the gentle patience required to help a child process what he had experienced. They had 12 days before the spring equinox. 12 days before 50 cities died. 12 days to accomplish what Batman had failed to do in 2 years. Damian pushed a completed map across the table, his voice flat with exhaustion. "This is the primary weapons facility," he said, pointing to a location in the Amazon rainforest. 27 scientists work there in shifts. They have produced enough biological agents to kill everyone in Sao Paulo, Mexico City, and Los Angeles combined. The security is 3 layers deep, with fail-safes that trigger self-destruct if breached improperly. Grandfather showed me this place because he wanted me to understand the scale of what we were accomplishing. Bruce studied the map, his tactical mind already calculating approach, vectors, and extraction scenarios, searching for weaknesses in security designed by someone who had been defending positions for 600 years. The Amazon facility was one of 17 Damian had detailed over the past 72 hours, each one containing enough death to depopulate entire regions. But the facilities were symptoms, not the disease itself. Destroying them would delay the great purification, but not prevent it. Because Raz had spent 2 centuries building redundancy into every system. What we need, Bruce said, thinking aloud, is not to destroy the weapons. We need to prevent their deployment. And that means understanding the command structure, the communication protocols, the exact mechanism by which Raz will simultaneously activate operations across 30 countries. Your grandfather is too smart to use conventional networks or vulnerable technology. There has to be a central control system, something he personally operates, something that cannot be delegated or decentralized. Damien nodded, reaching for another blank page, his small hands shaking with fatigue, but refusing to stop working. The demon's eye, he said. That is what grandfather calls it. A satellite network launched over the past decade using shell corporations and puppet governments, hidden in plain sight among commercial communications infrastructure. Each satellite carries authorization codes for specific regions. When the spring equinox arrives, grandfather will transmit a single encrypted pulse that activates all 50 operations simultaneously. Without that pulse, the local cells lack authorization to proceed. They are trained to wait for the signal, and only the signal. Bruce felt hope kindle for the first time since Geneva. A single point of failure, a vulnerability in a plan that had seemed invulnerable. If they could take down the satellite network, or intercept the transmission, or prevent Raz from sending the authorization pulse, the entire Great Purification would collapse. 50 separate operations would remain dormant, waiting for orders that would never come, giving authorities time to locate and neutralize them. But even as the hope grew, reality tempered it. Destroying satellites required resources beyond Batman's capabilities. The Justice League could help, but orbital mechanics and international space law complicated things. They had 12 days to coordinate a mission that would normally require months of planning. And Raz knew about this vulnerability, which meant he had certainly prepared countermeasures and backup systems that Damien's limited exposure had not revealed. "Where's your grandfather now?" Bruce asked. "Where does he command the League from?" Damien's expression darkened, fear flashing across his young face before being suppressed with visible effort. "He moves constantly, never staying in one location more than 3 days, but on the spring equinox, he will be at the birthplace. The place where he first discovered the Lazarus Pit 600 years ago. It is tradition, a ritual he performs for every major operation. He believes the location grants him clarity and strength, that returning to where his immortality began centers his purpose." Bruce leaned forward, intensity radiating from him, despite his exhaustion. "Where is the birthplace, Damien? Where is the original Lazarus Pit?" The boy met his father's eyes, and in that moment looked far older than his years. "I do not know the exact coordinates," he admitted. "Grandfather never told me, said I would learn when I became Demon's Head. But I know it is in the Arabian Desert, somewhere beneath ruins that predate Islam, Christianity, Judaism, all the religions that came after." He described it as a place where the earth's bones break through the surface, where stone carved by wind looks like sleeping demons waiting to wake. It was not much, but it was more than Batman had possessed an hour ago. Bruce pulled up satellite imagery of the Arabian Desert, overlaying archaeological data and geological surveys, searching for locations that matched Damien's description. The desert was vast. Millions of square miles of sand and rock and emptiness, where a hidden cave system could remain undiscovered for millennia. But Ra's al Ghul was not hiding from archaeologists. He was hiding from technological surveillance, which meant the Lazarus Pit would be in a location with specific characteristics. Deep enough to avoid thermal imaging, magnetically unusual enough to confuse ground-penetrating radar. Remote enough that 6 centuries of visitors had not created infrastructure or left traces satellites could detect. Bruce filtered the search parameters, narrowing possibilities from thousands to hundreds to dozens. He cross-referenced with historical records of strange phenomena, local legends about cursed places, and reports of unusual wildlife die-offs that might indicate toxic chemical seepage. The analysis took 6 hours, Alfred coordinating with Oracle and other Bat family members to process data faster than Bruce could alone. And finally, as dawn broke over Prague, they had 7 potential locations, 7 places where Ra's al Ghul might command the death of billions. 7 targets Batman would need to investigate in the 12 days remaining. 7 chances to find the man who had been 3 steps ahead for 2 years, and somehow, impossibly, stop him. The Justice League conference occurred via encrypted hologram, heroes appearing as translucent figures in the Prague safe house while their physical bodies remained scattered across the globe. Superman looked haggard, having spent the past week helping governments evacuate potential target cities, moving millions of people who had nowhere safe to go. Wonder Woman reported that her efforts to destroy League weapons facilities had resulted in 3 destroyed, 2 failed assaults, and 1 facility that had been empty for months, suggesting Raz knew exactly which operations were compromised. Green Lantern detailed the satellite network, confirming it existed and was far more sophisticated than conventional military systems, protected by international treaties and positioned among legitimate commercial infrastructure in ways that made targeted destruction legally and diplomatically complicated. "We are losing," Superman said bluntly, his frustration evident despite his normally optimistic demeanor. "Every action we take," Rez predicted and countered. "Every facility we raid has already been abandoned or reinforced. Every evacuation creates chaos that benefits the League's infiltration. We are fighting a man who has been planning this longer than our country has existed, and we are doing it with 12 days preparation. The mathematics are not in our favor." Batman had been standing silent throughout the briefing, letting his teammates vent their frustrations, understanding that they needed to express the hopelessness before he could present the plan that might save them. When Superman finished, when the uncomfortable silence stretched, and heroes looked at each other wondering if they should simply admit defeat, Bruce finally spoke. "I know where Ra's al Ghul will be on the spring equinox," he said. "I know the mechanism he will use to trigger the Great Purification, and I know how we stop it. But it requires precision, sacrifice, and accepting that we cannot save everyone. Some League operations will succeed. Some people will die, but we can prevent the death of billions if we are willing to make hard choices and execute perfectly despite impossible odds." He outlined the plan over the following hour, detailing how they would split into teams, how each team would have specific objectives that built toward a single goal, how success depended on everyone doing their part without hesitation or doubt. It was the most complex operation Batman had ever coordinated, required trust he was not certain they had earned, and would certainly result in casualties among heroes who had never failed to return from a mission. But it was also the only plan that had a chance of working. When he finished, the Justice League was silent. Then Wonder Woman, warrior princess who had faced gods and monsters without fear, asked the question everyone was thinking. "And if we fail, if Raz triggers the Great Purification despite our best efforts, what then?" Batman looked at Damian, at his son, who had been torn between 2 legacies and forced to choose heroism, despite every reason to choose easier paths. "Then we make sure he knows the cost," Bruce said quietly. "We make sure Ra's al Ghul lives to see the world he destroyed, lives to carry the weight of 2.7 billion deaths, lives forever in the hell of his own success. Because I think that is what he fears most. Not death or defeat, but getting everything he wanted and discovering it was not worth the price." The meeting adjourned, heroes returning to their physical locations to prepare for the final battle. leaving Bruce and Damien alone in the Prague safe house as afternoon shadows lengthened into evening. The boy had been silent throughout the briefing, listening with the intensity of someone committing every detail to memory, and now he looked at his father with an expression Bruce could not quite read. "You think grandfather wants to be stopped," Damien said. "Not quite a question. You think he has been engineering his own defeat, because 600 years has taught him that immortality without purpose is torture, and mass murder is the only purpose he has left." Bruce sat beside his son, pulling the boy close despite Damien's instinctive stiffness, feeling the small body gradually relax against him. "I think your grandfather is the loneliest person who has ever existed," he said. "I think he has watched everyone he loved die over and over for 6 centuries. I think the Lazarus Pit keeps bringing him back, but cannot restore what makes life worth living. And I think he is desperately hoping that someone, anyone, will prove him wrong about humanity so he can finally let go." Damien was quiet for a long moment, processing implications beyond his years. If we stop him, if we save the world, what happens to grandfather? Does he go to prison? Does he die? Does he disappear and start planning again for another 200 years? Bruce had been asking himself the same question, wrestling with what justice meant for someone who had committed genocide in theory, but not yet in practice, who was responsible for thousands of deaths over centuries, but also for preventing millions through careful manipulation of events Batman would never fully understand. The answer would define what kind of hero Batman was, what principles he actually held when tested against cosmic stakes. "I do not know," Bruce admitted. "Thought of me wants him to face trial, to be held accountable by the systems and laws he despises. Part of me thinks killing him would be mercy, preventing future atrocities, even if it violates everything Batman represents. And part of me thinks the greatest punishment would be forcing him to live in the world he failed to destroy, watching humanity muddle through and somehow survive, despite his certainty that we cannot." "What do you want, Father?" Damien asked. "If you could choose any outcome, if there were no consequences or compromises, what would you do with grandfather?" Bruce pulled his son closer, feeling the weight of the question and the terrible honesty it demanded. "I want to save him," Bruce said quietly. "I want to find a way to heal whatever the Lazarus Pit broke inside him, to help him remember what it means to be human instead of an immortal weapon. I want to believe that redemption is possible even for someone who has fallen as far as Ra's al Ghul. Because if I cannot believe that, if I accept that some people are beyond saving, then what am I doing? What is Batman for if not to prove that everyone deserves a chance at redemption?" Damien nodded against Bruce's chest, and when he spoke, his voice was very small. "Even me?" he asked. "Even after what I did in Geneva, after I killed that assassin, after I proved I am exactly what grandfather made me, do I deserve redemption too?" Bruce's arms tightened around his son, protective and fierce. "You were 4 years old, manipulated by someone who has been perfecting manipulation for centuries, trained from birth to obey authority figures, even when those authorities demand terrible things. What happened in Geneva was not your fault, Damien. It was mine for letting Rez take you. It was the League's for corrupting you. It was every adult who failed to protect you from becoming a weapon. But it was not yours. You are a child, and children deserve protection, not blame." The boy was crying now, silent tears that soaked through Bruce's shirt, releasing trauma and guilt that had been building for months. Bruce held him, letting the emotion flow without trying to fix it or minimize it or rush through it toward recovery. Because this was what Damien needed, what Bruce had needed at the same age when his parents died, and Alfred had simply held him while he sobbed. Sometimes the only thing you could do for someone in pain was witness it, acknowledge it, and promise that they were not alone in carrying it. They stayed like that until the sun set completely, until Prague's lights flickered on outside, and the safe house became an island of dim security in a city that did not know how close it was to ending. Then Bruce gently extracted himself, went to the computers that lined one wall, and began the final preparations for a mission that would determine whether his son had a future worth living. 11 days remained, 11 days to save the world, stop an immortal terrorist, and prove that Batman's way, the hard, stubborn insistence on redemption and hope, despite all evidence to the contrary, was more than naive idealism. It was the only thing that separated heroes from monsters, the only principle that made fighting worth the cost, the only faith that could sustain someone through centuries of loss or a single night of trauma. Bruce Wayne had been preparing for this moment his entire life. The moment when everything he believed would be tested against reality's cruelest calculations. The moment when he would have to choose between pragmatic evil and principled heroism with billions of lives in the balance. The moment when Batman would either prove Ra's al Ghul wrong or die trying. He chose heroism. He always would. And in 11 days the world would discover whether that choice was wisdom or fatal delusion. Chapter 9. The Seven Tombs. The first location was in Jordan, beneath ruins that tour guides called the Treasury at Petra, but which predated the city carved by Nabateans by thousands of years. Batman and Wonder Woman descended at midnight through cracks in the sandstone, following passages that smelled of mineral deposits and something older, something that reminded Bruce of the Geneva Cavern where Ra's had demonstrated his power. They found a chamber 300 feet below the surface, walls carved with symbols no archaeologist had ever recorded, and in the center a pool of liquid that might have been water, but reflected light wrong, bending it in ways that hurt to observe. Not a Lazarus Pit, Wonder Woman said, her voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space, but related somehow, a failed attempt, or a prototype that was abandoned. Bruce approached the pool carefully, his sensors detecting chemical signatures that matched Lazarus Pit samples, but in wrong proportions, like someone had tried to recreate the formula from incomplete notes. On the far wall, carved in stone with obsessive precision, were calculations and diagrams that traced the evolution of an idea across centuries. A scientific journal written in a dead language, documenting Ra's al Ghul's attempts to understand and replicate the accident that had given him immortality. Location 1 was empty, except for history. No command center, no satellite controls, no sign that Ra's considered this place important beyond academic interest. Batman documented everything, took samples, and moved to the next target, while Wonder Woman secured the site to prevent League agents from destroying evidence. The second location was in Iraq, near the ruins of Babylon, and they found it occupied. 50 League assassins defended a facility that contained computer systems capable of coordinating global operations, backup power sufficient to run for years without external support, and living quarters suggesting someone important spent significant time here. Batman and Green Lantern fought through the defenses with efficiency born of desperation, taking down guards without killing but without mercy either, searching for the satellite controls that would let them shut down the Great Purification. What they found instead was a decoy, sophisticated, inexpensive, and utterly useless, a facility designed to look like a command center, but containing no actual connection to the Demon's Eye satellite network. Ra's had known they would find this place, had populated it specifically to waste their time and resources, had perhaps been watching their assault in real time and laughing at heroes, dancing to a tune he composed centuries ago. 9 days remained. The third location was in Yemen, deep in territory controlled by groups that fired on American aircraft and trusted no outsider. Superman went alone, his invulnerability allowing him to ignore anti-aircraft fire, his speed letting him search cave systems in hours that would take normal teams weeks. He found another Lazarus Pit, this one active and steaming, its waters the toxic green Bruce, remembered from descriptions in League files. But the pit was empty of people, guarded by automated defenses that suggested it was maintained but not currently used, a resource held in reserve rather than an operational command post. 8 days remained, and Batman had eliminated 3 of 7 possible locations. The mathematics were becoming uncomfortable. 4 locations left, 8 days to search them. And each mission required travel across continents and combat against enemies who knew the terrain better than any hero. They were running out of time faster than they were running out of targets. The 4th location was in Saudi Arabia, technically, though the coordinates placed it in the empty quarter, where national boundaries meant nothing and satellite surveillance showed only endless dunes unmarked by human presence. The Flash went first, his speed allowing rapid reconnaissance, expecting to find nothing but sand and heat, and the bones of travelers who had died crossing this wasteland over millennia. Instead, he found a city. Not a modern city. Not even ruins of an ancient city, but something else entirely. Structures that looked grown rather than built. Stone shaped by methods that predated masonry. Arranged in patterns that hurt to look at, because the geometry was subtly wrong, in ways human brains were not equipped to process. The Flash retreated immediately, his report delivered with uncharacteristic fear, describing a place that felt malevolent in ways he could not articulate, where the air tasted of copper and time moved differently depending on which direction you walked. Batman went next, bringing Martian Manhunter for psychic protection against whatever had frightened the Flash, descending into the buried city through shafts that seemed to go down forever. What they found at the bottom made Bruce question everything he thought he understood about Ra's al Ghul's origin story, because this was not a natural Lazarus Pit. This was engineered, built by a civilization that had mastered biological alchemy millennia before chemistry was invented, designed with purpose. Batman could only guess at, but which clearly involved transformation and preservation and the blurring of lines between life and death. And in the center of the city, in a chamber that resonated with psychic pressure that made Martian Manhunter grip his head and groan with pain, they found evidence that Ra's al Ghul had been here recently. Within the past week, sensors suggested, long enough to perform some ritual or preparation, but not long enough to suggest this was his operational base. 5 days remained, and Batman had found nothing that would stop the Great Purification. The 5th location was in Oman, in mountains that locals avoided, claiming the peaks were cursed by jinn who stole the souls of travelers. Damian insisted on accompanying this mission, his knowledge of League protocols potentially useful, his desire to prove himself to his father impossible to deny, despite Bruce's every protective instinct. They climbed through the night, father and son, moving in silence that spoke of shared understanding and complementary skills, reaching a plateau as dawn broke over Arabia Felix. The plateau held a garden, impossible, unnatural, defying every law of ecology and climate. A garden bloomed in the desert at 11,000 feet elevation. Flowers that should not exist. Trees bearing fruit from different continents simultaneously, and in the center, a fountain whose water flowed upward before cascading down in defiance of gravity. It was beautiful and terrible, a demonstration of power that rewrote local reality through sheer accumulated knowledge and resources. Talia al Ghul sat beside the fountain, waiting. She wore simple robes, no weapons visible, her hair loose in the mountain wind, and when she saw Bruce and Damian, her expression cycled through joy and sorrow and resignation so quickly that Bruce almost missed the progression. She stood, arms spread in a gesture that was both welcoming and surrendering, her voice carrying clearly across the impossible garden. "Welcome, beloved," she said. "Welcome, my son. I knew you would come here eventually. My father designed this place specifically to draw you to it, a puzzle you could not resist solving, a location too perfect to be anything but a trap. And yet you came anyway, because you had no choice, because time runs short and options dwindle, because Batman always walks into traps, believing he can spring them before they close." Bruce moved forward cautiously, his hand resting on Damien's shoulder, keeping his son slightly behind him, despite the boy's protest. "Where is your father, Talia? Where is Raz? Where will he be on the spring equinox when he sends the signal that kills billions?" Talia's smile was sad, the expression of someone who has accepted defeat but found no peace in acceptance. "He is nowhere," she said, "and he is everywhere. My father has not maintained a permanent base of operations for 300 years, not since assassins working for enemies I no longer remember burned the last place he called home. He moves constantly, sleeps in different locations every night, conducts league business through encrypted communications and loyal subordinaries who have never met him face to face. The man you are hunting does not exist in any fixed position. He is an idea that manifests temporarily in physical space before dissolving back into the network he has built." Bruce felt frustration rising, the clock in his head counting down hours remaining, the weight of billions of lives pressing down until breathing became difficult. "Then, how do we stop him?" he demanded. "If he is nowhere, if the satellite network operates automatically, if the great purification proceeds without his direct involvement, then what was the point of any of this? What was the point of the tests and the manipulations and the years of psychological warfare, if he was never going to give us a chance to actually stop him?" Talia approached slowly, her hands visible and empty, stopping just outside Bruce's reach. "Because he wanted you to understand," she said softly. "Wanted you to see the world as he sees it, to grasp the scope of what he has built and the futility of opposing it, to finally accept that some problems are too large for individual heroism. The great purification is not about killing billions, beloved. It is about teaching Batman that he cannot save everyone, that his principles are beautiful but inadequate, that eventually even heroes must make the calculations he finds so abhorrent." She looked at Damien, her son who had been used as a weapon in a war he did not understand, and tears began flowing down her face. "I was supposed to kill you both here," she continued, her voice breaking. "The garden is positioned perfectly for satellite surveillance, every angle monitored. My father watching from wherever he hides to see if I would finally prove my loyalty by eliminating the two people I love most. But I cannot do it, cannot pull the trigger or spring the trap or whatever method he prepared for me. I am sorry, Father," she said, speaking to cameras hidden among impossible flowers. "I am sorry, I am too weak to be your successor. But I love them more than I love your mission. And that means I have already lost." Movement erupted around the garden. As assassins emerged from concealment, dozens of League members who had been waiting for Talia's betrayal, weapons trained on the three people standing beside the fountain. Bruce pulled Damien close, his tactical mind calculating odds that were not survivable, searching for escape routes that did not exist. Preparing to die protecting his son even though dying meant failure on a scale that would haunt history. But before anyone could fire, here before the trap could spring shut completely, a voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "Stand down," Ra's al Ghul commanded, his tone carrying absolute authority. "All of you, stand down now. I did not spend 6 centuries building the League of Assassins to have it destroyed because my daughter chose love over duty. Lower your weapons and withdraw." This moment belongs to family, not soldiers. The assassins obeyed instantly, melting back into the rocks and shadows, leaving Bruce, Talia, and Damien alone in the impossible garden, while Ross's voice continued speaking from hidden speakers. You have 4 days remaining, detective. 4 days before the spring equinox, before the demon's eye activates, before humanity faces judgment for its crimes against the planet. You will not find me in time because I am not hiding in any of your 7 locations, but I will give you one final chance, one last test, because you have earned it through persistence and principle and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The voice paused, and in the silence Bruce could hear his own heartbeat, could feel Damien trembling against him, could see Talia's expression of dawning horror. On the spring equinox, Roz continued, I will be at the birthplace as tradition demands, but I will not be alone. I will have with me the manual override for the demon's eye, the single point of failure you correctly identified, the control mechanism that can stop the great purification even after the automated sequence begins. If you can reach me, if you can take the override from my hands, if you can defeat me in single combat, as I have always secretly hoped you would, then you can save your world. The garden's fountain suddenly ran red, water becoming blood. The symbolic gesture crude but effective. But know this, detective. The birthplace is protected by every remaining League assassin, by traps I have spent decades preparing, by defenses designed specifically to counter your methods and your allies. You will need to sacrifice everything to reach me, your principles, your teammates, your certainty that heroism is different from murder. And even if you win, even if you take the override and stop the purification, you will never be the same person who began this journey. You will be broken and compromised, and forever changed by what you had to do to succeed. So choose carefully, Batman. Choose whether saving humanity is worth destroying Bruce Wayne. The voice fell silent, leaving only the sound of wind through impossible flowers and the drip of blood from a fountain that moments ago had defied gravity. Talia collapsed, her strength finally exhausted, her body shaking with sobs that released years of accumulated trauma and impossible choices. Bruce stood frozen, processing implications that rewrote his understanding of everything that had happened, while Damien looked up at his father with eyes that held a terrible question. Are you going to do it? The boy asked. Are you going to become what grandfather wants in order to stop him? Are you going to kill Bruce Wayne? Batman, father and hero and symbol of justice, stared at his son and could not answer, because he did not know if principles could be maintained in the face of apocalypse, did not know if there was a difference between compromising values to save billions and simply having weak values to begin with. Did not know if he was strong enough to win without becoming the monster he had spent his life opposing. 4 days remained, and Batman still had no idea how to save the world. Chapter 10. The Price of Principles. The Justice League gathered in the Watchtower 3 days before the spring equinox, Earth rotating slowly beneath them through viewports that showed continents sleeping in darkness and oceans reflecting moonlight like scattered diamonds. 50 cities glowed on those continents, target markers displayed on tactical screens, populations totaling 2.7 billion people who had no idea their deaths had been scheduled with accounting precision. The silence in the conference room held the weight of impossible decisions. Heroes who had saved the world dozens of times now facing a threat they could not punch or inspire or science their way out of. Batman stood before them, still in costume, despite exhaustion that made his body ache and his thoughts slow, and presented the situation with brutal honesty. We have failed, he said. The words bitter, but necessary. For 2 years we have fought the League of Assassins, using heroic methods, refusing to cross lines or compromise principles, trusting that justice and law would prevail against an enemy who respects neither. We were wrong. Ra's al Ghul has outmaneuvered us at every turn, not because he is smarter, but because he was willing to do what we would not. And now we have 3 days to decide if we will continue failing with our principles intact, or succeed by becoming something we swore never to be. Superman leaned forward, his normally confident expression troubled in ways that made him look disturbingly human. "What are you proposing?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew and dreaded the answer. Bruce pulled up intelligence on the screens, satellite imagery of the Arabian Desert, geological surveys of cave systems, and most damning, a list of 643 League members whose termination would effectively destroy the organization, even if the Great Purification succeeded. "Torture," he said bluntly. "Systematic, efficient, targeted torture of captured League members until someone reveals the exact location of the birthplace, followed by an assault that accepts civilian casualties as inevitable, that uses lethal force against every defender, that prioritizes mission success over adherence to law or ethics, and finally, if necessary, the execution of Ra's al Ghul, not because he deserves death under any system of justice we recognize, but because he is too dangerous to leave alive." The room erupted. Superman argued that becoming killers would make them no different than those they fought. Wonder Woman pointed out that warriors sometimes had to make hard choices, but suggested there must be intermediate options they had not yet explored. Green Lantern questioned whether Batman had finally broken, whether the pressure had compromised his judgment. Martian Manhunter remained silent, his telepathic senses detecting the roiling conflict in Bruce's mind. The way Batman was tearing himself apart, proposing actions that violated everything he believed. Only one person supported the plan: Damian, sitting in a chair too large for his small frame, spoke with the cold calculation of someone who had been trained by the League and understood exactly what they were facing. "My father is correct," the boy said, his voice cutting through the argument with unexpected authority. "You are thinking like heroes, when you should be thinking like soldiers. Grandfather has been planning this for 2 centuries. He has accounted for heroic opposition, for legal challenges, for public pressure and political interference. What he has not accounted for is you becoming as ruthless as he is, because he believes you cannot, because your inability to compromise is what makes you predictable." The Justice League stared at the 4-year-old who was lecturing them on military strategy, seeing in his eyes the disturbing intelligence that came from genetic enhancement and accelerated development. Superman opened his mouth to object, to argue that a child should not be counseling murder, but Damian continued before he could speak. "I killed someone in Geneva," the boy said, his voice flat, but his hands trembling. "I murdered an assassin, because grandfather ordered me to, because I had been conditioned to obey, because at 4 years old I did not have the strength to refuse. That act will haunt me forever. But it also taught me something you have not yet learned, that the difference between heroism and villainy is not whether you kill, but who you kill, and why. Grandfather kills to impose his vision. You would kill to prevent genocide. Those are not the same thing, and pretending they are is moral cowardice disguised as principle." The argument raged for 3 more hours, heroes dividing along philosophical lines that revealed fractures in the Justice League's foundation. Some argued that ends could never justify means, that the moment they embraced Ra's methods they had already lost, regardless of whether they stopped the Great Purification. Others countered that moral purity meant nothing to the billions who would die, that principles were luxuries purchased with other people's lives, that sometimes heroism required getting your hands bloody and living with the consequences. Batman listened to all of it, his expression unreadable behind the cowl, waiting for the anger to exhaust itself before speaking again. "I am not asking the Justice League to become executioners," he said finally, his voice cutting through the diminishing argument. "I am asking you to make a choice. You can maintain your principles and accept that 2.7 billion people will die, or you can compromise those principles temporarily, do what is necessary to stop Ra's al Ghul, and spend the rest of your lives living with what you became. But you cannot have both. You cannot save everyone and remain pure. The universe does not allow it." Superman stood, his cape settling around him with unconscious dramatic effect, his expression holding determination mixed with sorrow. "Then I choose principles," he said. "I choose to believe that there is a way to stop Ra's al Ghul without becoming him, that we have not yet exhausted our options, that heroism means finding a third path when faced with impossible choices. I will not torture. I will not execute. I will not cross those lines even to save billions, because the moment I do, I am no longer someone worthy of saving anyone." Other heroes nodded agreement, the majority siding with Superman's position, relief evident that someone had articulated what they were feeling. Batman had expected this, had known the Justice League would never embrace methods that contradicted their fundamental nature, had perhaps been counting on it because if they had agreed too easily, he would have questioned whether they were still heroes or simply pragmatists with good publicity. "Then the Justice League will continue operating as before," Bruce said, no judgment in his tone. "You will work within systems and laws, you will use non-lethal methods, you will be the symbols of hope humanity needs, even if that hope proves inadequate. I respect your choice, and I will not ask you to violate your principles again." Superman's relief was visible, the tension draining from his posture. "Thank you, Bruce. I know this was not an easy position for you to argue, but we will find another way. We always do." Batman said nothing, simply disconnected from the conference and teleported back to Earth, leaving the Justice League to coordinate their doomed heroic resistance while he pursued the only plan that had a real chance of success. Because Bruce Wayne had made his choice too, had decided that saving billions was worth sacrificing his soul, had accepted that he would cross every line he swore to protect and become the monster Gotham's criminals whispered about in the dark. He would torture League members for information. He would kill anyone who stood between him and Ra's al Ghul. He would use every vicious tactic and dirty method he had learned over decades of studying criminals and madmen. He would become exactly what Ra's wanted him to become, not because Ra's was right, but because sometimes the only way to defeat evil was to temporarily embrace it. And when it was over, when the great purification was stopped, and humanity continued its stumbling progress towards self-destruction or transcendence, Bruce Wayne would turn himself in, would face trial for his crimes, would accept whatever punishment society deemed appropriate for someone who had murdered to prevent genocide. Because if principles meant anything, they had to mean something even after they were violated, especially after they were violated. But first he had 3 days to save the world, and he would start with the 6 League members Oracle had identified as most likely to know the birthplace's location, currently imprisoned in facilities across Europe and Asia. Facilities that believed they held terrorists awaiting trial. Facilities that had no idea Batman was coming to extract confessions by any means necessary. Alfred found Bruce in the Batcave 12 hours later, preparing equipment that the old butler had hoped never to see used. Interrogation tools designed to cause maximum pain without permanent damage, chemical compounds that would override free will and loosen tongues, psychological torture protocols that would break even trained assassins. Bruce worked methodically, testing each item, ensuring everything functioned perfectly, his expression empty of emotion because feeling anything would make this impossible. "Master Bruce, Alfred said quietly, standing at a distance that suggested he was afraid to come closer, afraid of what he might see if he looked too closely at the man he had raised. Please tell me you are not truly planning to do this. Please tell me that the boy I watched grow up, the man who swore to honor his parents' memory through justice rather than vengeance, has not been so thoroughly broken that he would embrace torture and murder. Bruce continued his preparations, not looking at Alfred because meeting those disappointed eyes would shatter his resolve. I am planning exactly what it appears. I am planning, he said, his voice devoid of inflection. I am going to torture 6 people for information. If they do not provide it, I will torture their families in front of them until they do. If that fails, I will execute them and move to the next candidate. I will continue this process until someone tells me where to find Ras Al Ghul, and then I will kill everyone between me and that location, including the ancient warrior himself. This is not broken speaking, Alfred. This is clarity. This is finally understanding that heroism has limits, and that those limits are measured in body counts we refuse to accept. Alfred moved closer, placing himself directly in Bruce's line of sight, forcing eye contact. And after, he asked, after you have tortured and killed, after you have become the very thing you swore to oppose, what then? Do you believe you can simply return to being Batman, to inspiring hope and protecting the innocent, with blood permanently staining your hands? Bruce finally looked up, and what Alfred saw in his eyes made the old butler flinch. After, there is no more Batman, Bruce said. After, Bruce Wayne goes to prison for crimes against humanity and spends whatever life remains contemplating whether the price was worth it. But there will be a after, Alfred. There will be billions of people who never knew how close they came to dying, who will grow up and fall in love and create art and science, and all the messy, beautiful complexity that makes civilization worthwhile. That is what I am buying with my soul. That is why this is necessary. They stood in silence, the weight of the decision filling the cave until breathing became difficult, until even the bats hanging from the ceiling seemed to hold themselves perfectly still, as if nature itself had paused to witness this moment. Finally, Alfred spoke with the careful precision of someone delivering a verdict. Then I am coming with you, the old butler said. I will not participate in the torture or the killing, but I will be there to witness what you do, to remember every choice and every compromise, to ensure that someone who loves you sees the man you become when principles fail. Because if you are going to sacrifice yourself to save the world, Master Bruce, you will not do it alone. That is what family means. That is what the vow I made to your parents demands. I will stand beside you in hell, and I will never forgive you for making it necessary. Bruce felt something crack inside him, some last defense against emotion giving way under the weight of unconditional support that he did not deserve. He nodded, unable to speak, accepting Alfred's companionship, knowing it would make everything harder, but also more bearable. They finished preparations in silence, loading equipment into the Batwing, checking coordinates for the first interrogation, doing what needed to be done because someone had to, and the Justice League had chosen purity over effectiveness. 2 days remained, and Batman was about to become the villain in someone else's story. The first interrogation occurred in a CIA black site in Poland, a facility that did not officially exist, where terrorists were held without trial or legal representation. Batman infiltrated at midnight, disabled security with ease born of decades of practice, and found his target in a cell designed to break prisoners through isolation and sensory deprivation. The League member was female, perhaps 30, trained to resist conventional interrogation, expecting to be traded eventually as part of some intelligence exchange or political negotiation. She was not expecting Batman to inject her with a compound that would make her watch her worst nightmares while fully conscious for the next 6 hours unless she told him what he needed to know. "Tell me where the birthplace is," Batman said, his voice flat and mechanical. "Tell me the exact coordinates of the original Lazarus Pit, where Ra's al Ghul will be on the spring equinox. You have 30 seconds to comply before I begin the treatment." The woman laughed, the sound sharp with defiance. "I will tell you nothing," she said in Arabic. "Grandfather has prepared us for this. We know you will not truly harm us. Know you will stop before permanent damage. Know you are constrained by morality that makes you weak. You are Batman. You are a hero. And heroes do not torture." Batman injected the compound without hesitation, watched the woman's defiance transform into screaming terror as the drug took effect, monitored her vitals to ensure she remained conscious throughout the experience. Alfred stood in the corner, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists, witnessing as promised but hating every second. The woman broke in 4 hours. Her mind shattered by visions Bruce would never ask her to describe, babbling coordinates and access codes and information about League defenses that would make the assault marginally less suicidal. 5 more interrogations followed over the next 36 hours, each one confirming the location, each one costing Bruce another piece of his humanity, each one proving that Ra's al Ghul had been right about one thing. Everyone breaks eventually. Everyone compromises. Everyone discovers that their principles are negotiable when the stakes climb high enough. By the time Bruce had the information he needed, by the time he knew exactly where to find Ra's al Ghul and how to reach him through defenses that would kill hundreds, he was no longer sure if he was saving the world or simply proving that humanity deserved to be purged. He had become what criminals feared, what children had nightmares about, what the League of Assassins represented. He had crossed every line that separated him from the monsters he fought, and he had 24 hours to complete the transformation by killing the ancient warrior who had engineered this corruption with 6 centuries of planning. Batman returned to the Batcave, washed blood from his hands that he could still feel despite the water running clear, and looked at his reflection in the mirror that had witnessed 30 years of Bruce Wayne preparing to become something more than human. What he saw looking back was something less, a broken man who had chosen billions of strangers over his own soul, who had made the hard choice that heroes were supposed to make, but discovered that making it did not feel heroic at all, who now understood why Ra's al Ghul moved through the world with such weary certainty that he was right. Damien found him there, the boy appearing silently, standing beside his father, with an expression far too old for his face. "You did what was necessary," the boy said. "You saved people who will never know they needed saving. That is what heroism looks like, when you strip away the mythology and face reality without flinching." Bruce looked down at his son, at the child he had tortured people to save a world for, wondering if Damien's ability to accept this so easily was a gift or a curse, wisdom or damage, the beginning of something better, or simply more of the same cycle of violence Raz had been perpetuating for centuries. "I am not a hero anymore," Bruce said. "I am just a man who chose a lesser evil, and will spend the rest of his life wondering if there was a choice he missed, an option he did not see, a way to save everyone without destroying himself." Damien reached up, taking his father's hand, small fingers gripping tight. "Then perhaps the goal was never to be a hero," the boy said. "Perhaps the goal was simply to be someone who cares enough to try, who refuses to accept that some people are acceptable losses, who makes the impossible choices knowing they will be condemned for it. Grandfather is wrong about many things, father, but he is right that the world needs people willing to bear burdens others cannot even acknowledge exist." They stood together in the Batcave's dimness, while the Bat-computer counted down hours remaining, father and son united by shared trauma and impossible choices, preparing for the final battle that would determine whether Bruce Wayne's sacrifice had meaning, or whether he had simply proven that there is no meaningful difference between heroes and villains when the stakes climb high enough. 24 hours remained, and Batman, the symbol that had protected Gotham for decades, was dead. What would rise to face Ra's al Ghul in the birthplace was something else entirely, something darker, something necessary, something that Gotham would never forgive, and Bruce Wayne would never forget. Chapter 11. The Demon's Birthplace. The Arabian Desert at dawn was a landscape of fire and shadow, dunes glowing amber beneath a sun that had watched civilizations rise and crumble into dust for 10,000 years. Batman stood at the coordinates extracted through methods he would never speak of again, staring at rock formations that did indeed look like sleeping demons, their stone faces carved by wind into expressions of eternal torment. Somewhere beneath those formations lay the cave system where a physician 600 years ago had discovered immortality and lost his humanity in exchange. Alfred stood beside him, having insisted on accompanying Bruce to the end, despite being told repeatedly that this mission would likely be fatal. The old butler wore body armor that looked wrong on his dignified frame, carried medical supplies he hoped would not be needed, but knew certainly would be, and maintained the same unflappable composure he had shown through 3 decades of Bruce's crusade. If Master Bruce is walking into hell, Alfred had said when Bruce tried one final time to convince him to stay behind, then I shall be there to ensure the tea is properly prepared. Damien completed their small team, the 4-year-old boy who should have been home learning to read, but instead wore modified League armor and carried weapons he had been trained to use before he could walk. Bruce had tried to prevent this too, had argued that no child should witness what was about to happen, but Damien had been immovable. You will need someone who knows League tactics from the inside, the boy had said with logic that admitted no counter-argument. You will need someone small enough to access spaces you cannot. And you will need someone who can speak to grandfather without being immediately killed. I am coming, father. You cannot stop me without wasting time. We do not have. So here they stood. 3 people against an army, preparing to descend into caves that held the greatest concentration of trained killers on Earth. To reach a man who had spent 6 centuries perfecting the art of survival, to prevent an automated sequence that would trigger in 6 hours, regardless of whether they succeeded or failed. The mathematics were not favorable. The odds approached 0. But Batman had faced impossible odds before, had walked into certain death, and emerged victorious through preparation and refusal to accept defeat. Except this time Batman was not the one walking into the caves. The person descending into darkness was someone else. Someone willing to kill, someone who had already crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. Bruce Wayne wearing Batman's costume but no longer worthy of the symbol. A broken man on a final mission that would determine whether his corruption had meaning or whether he had simply proven Ra's al Ghul correct about everything. The cave entrance appeared as the sun climbed higher, heat causing the air to shimmer until rock formations seemed to shift and breathe. A crack in the stone face, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, exhaling cool air that smelled of minerals and chemical compounds and the sweet rot of organic matter decaying in darkness. No guards were visible, no defenses apparent, just an invitation into depths that had swallowed better men than Bruce Wayne and never returned them. They descended single file. Bruce, leading with night vision engaged, Alfred in the middle with one hand on Bruce's shoulder for guidance, Damien bringing up the rear with the hyper-aware alertness of someone who had learned that safety was an illusion and danger could manifest from any direction. The passage descended steeply, stone walls pressing close enough to brush shoulders, the only sound their breathing, and the distant drip of water echoing from chambers far below. The first trap triggered 30 meters down, when Damien's weight activated a pressure plate that Bruce's sensors had somehow missed. Blades erupted from walls with enough force to have bisected anyone standing on that exact square of stone, but the boy had already moved, his league training allowing him to react before conscious thought registered danger. He rolled forward, calling out a warning, and Bruce immediately altered his movement pattern, searching for visual tells that would identify subsequent traps in the dim green wash of night vision. They found 23 more traps in the first 100 meters, each more sophisticated than the last, suggesting Raz had indeed spent decades preparing these defenses. Poison darts that Bruce's armor stopped, but that carried toxins designed specifically to penetrate his suit's weak points. A section of floor that would have collapsed into a pit lined with stakes if Damien had not recognized the League construction method and warned them away. An acoustic weapon that triggered when they spoke, emitting frequencies calibrated to disrupt human neural patterns until Alfred identified the speakers and destroyed them with shots from a pistol. Bruce had not known the old butler carried. 2 hours into the descent, they reached the first checkpoint, where League members waited in a chamber that had been turned into a kill box, every angle of fire calculated for maximum lethality. Nowhere to hide, and no way forward, except through defenders who had trained their entire lives for this exact scenario. 20 assassins stood in perfect formation, weapons ready, eyes visible behind masks that reflected Bruce's night vision, like animal pupils catching light. Batman did not hesitate, did not offer them the chance to surrender or attempt non-lethal takedowns. He simply attacked with the brutal efficiency of someone who had abandoned heroism in favor of effectiveness. His movements economical and lethal, accepting that these people would die because they stood between him and saving billions. He used techniques he had learned, but never employed, pressure points that killed instead of incapacitating, strikes that crushed windpipes and stopped hearts, methods that would have horrified the Justice League, but that ended fights in seconds rather than minutes. Alfred and Damien provided support, the old butler's military training emerging after decades of dormancy, the boy's League conditioning making him devastatingly effective despite his size. The battle lasted 7 minutes and left all 20 assassins dead or dying. Bruce standing in the center of carnage wearing armor splashed with blood that was not his own, breathing hard but not from exertion, from the effort of not breaking down as he processed what he had just done. No time for reflection. No space for doubt. 6 more checkpoints stood between them and Ra's al Ghul. 6 more opportunities for Bruce to prove he had become the monster necessary to win this war. They moved forward, leaving bodies behind, descending deeper into the earth, where the air grew thick with chemical vapors and the stone walls began showing phosphorescent veins that pulsed like living tissue. The second checkpoint held 30 assassins and was defended by someone Bruce recognized. Uba, Ra's al Ghul's most loyal bodyguard, a man who had served the Demon's Head for 40 years and had survived challenges from warriors across the globe. He stood at the center of his fighters, a mountain of muscle and scar tissue, and when he spoke his voice carried the resignation of someone who knows he is going to die, but accepts it as the cost of duty. "I had hoped we would not meet this way, Detective," Ubu said. "I had hoped you would remain the hero who inspired even those he opposed. But Ra's al Ghul predicted this outcome. Said you would eventually understand that heroism was insufficient and would embrace methods you once condemned. He wanted me to tell you, before we fight, that he is proud of what you have become, that you have finally proven yourself worthy of succeeding him as Demon's Head." Batman said nothing, simply attacked. because words were luxuries he could no longer afford, and because Ubu's message was designed to create doubt, to make Bruce hesitate, to give defenders the fractional advantage that would turn an impossible fight into a certainly fatal one. The battle was harder, Ubu's skill and strength, pushing Bruce to limits he had rarely tested, forcing him to use every dirty trick and brutal technique in his arsenal just to survive. Alfred went down early, a blade opening his shoulder, the old butler collapsing with a cry of pain that made Bruce's concentration waver for a critical second. Damien saved him, the boy moving with speed that should have been impossible, his small sword finding gaps in Ubu's defense that adult fighters could not have reached, striking at nerves and pressure points with precision that spoke of genetic enhancement and lifetimes worth of training compressed into 4 years. Together, father and son brought down the giant, left him bleeding on ancient stone, while they secured Alfred's wound and prepared to continue. "Can you walk?" Bruce asked his oldest friend, the man who had raised him, the person he had dragged into hell through selfishness or necessity, or some combination of both. Alfred's face was pale with blood loss, but his eyes remained clear and determined. "I did not come this far to quit before the finale, Master Bruce," he said. "Though I confess I am reconsidering my decision to pack tea supplies rather than heavier weapons." They moved forward, Bruce supporting Alfred while Damien scouted ahead, the boy's small size and league training making him ideal for detecting traps that would have killed adults. 4 more checkpoints followed, 4 more battles that left Bruce with injuries he was ignoring through chemical enhancement and sheer willpower, 4 more collections of bodies that would haunt his dreams if he survived long enough to sleep again. The 6th checkpoint was empty, except for a single figure standing before massive doors carved with symbols that predated language. Talia al Ghul waited for them, dressed in ceremonial robes, unarmed, her expression holding sorrow so vast it seemed to fill the cavern. She did not move as they approached, did not reach for weapons or call for reinforcements, simply stood as living barrier between them and the final chamber where her father commanded humanity's extinction. "I cannot let you pass, beloved," she said quietly. "Not because I agree with my father's methods or believe the great purification is just, but because letting you kill him would break you beyond repair, would destroy the man I love more completely than any physical death. So I offer you one final choice. Turn back now, leave the caves, let the world face whatever consequences come, or kill me. Prove that you have become exactly what my father wanted, and carry that weight along with all the others you have accumulated descending through his defenses." Bruce stopped 3 meters from her, Damien beside him, Alfred leaning heavily on a wall, and breathing hard from exertion and blood loss. The massive doors behind Talia were the last barrier, the final obstacle, so close to the goal that turning back was unthinkable. But killing Talia, murdering the mother of his child to reach her father, that would be the ultimate corruption. The final proof that Bruce Wayne no longer existed, and only the monster remained. "Move," Bruce said, his voice harsh with pain and exhaustion and the terrible knowledge of what he was capable of now. "Move aside, Talia. Do not make me kill you too." Talia smiled, sad and beautiful, and utterly certain of her choice. "That is exactly what I am making you do, beloved," she said. "Because if you can kill me, if you can murder someone you love to serve your greater purpose, then you have become my father, and his victory is complete, regardless of whether the great purification succeeds. But if you cannot kill me, if some fragment of Bruce Wayne remains beneath the blood and compromise, then perhaps there is still hope for redemption. So choose, my love. Choose whether saving the world is worth destroying your soul entirely." The cavern fell silent, except for Alfred's labored breathing and the distant sound of water dripping on stone. Bruce stood frozen, his hand on a weapon he had killed 23 people with over the past hours, staring at the woman he loved and realizing that Ra's al Ghul had engineered this moment with 6 centuries of accumulated cruelty and understanding. Because Talia was right. If Bruce killed her, he would have proven every terrible thing Ra's believed about humanity and heroism and the inevitable corruption that came with power. But if he could not kill her, then billions would die, and his sacrifice, all the torture and murder and compromise, would be meaningless. It was the trap beneath the trap, beneath the trap, and Bruce had walked into it willingly. "Father," Damien said quietly, his small voice cutting through the paralysis. "I can reach grandfather without hurting mother. I can squeeze through gaps in the door. I am small enough and trained for infiltration. You do not have to make this choice. You do not have to become the monster grandfather wants. Let me do what I was trained to do." Bruce looked down at his son, at the 4-year-old boy offering to commit patricide so his father would not have to commit murder, and felt the last foundations of his certainty crumble into dust. Because letting Damien kill Ra's al Ghul would be worse than doing it himself, would be using his son as a weapon, would be exactly the corruption the League specialized in, the sacrifice of children to adult purposes that Bruce had spent his life opposing. "No," Bruce said, the word emerging with absolute finality. "No more killing. No more compromise. No more pretending that evil methods serve good purposes." He dropped his weapons, let them clatter on stone floor, and stood before Talia with empty hands and tears streaming down his face behind the cowl. "I will not kill you," he said. "I will not kill your father. I will not kill anyone else, even to save billions, because I finally understand what Raz has been trying to teach me, that the moment I accepted killing as necessary, I had already lost. That principles are not negotiable constraints, but fundamental definitions of who we are. That Bruce Wayne is not a tool to be sacrificed for Batman's mission, but a person whose soul has value beyond utilitarian calculations." He turned to Alfred, to the man who had witnessed his corruption, who had promised to remember every choice. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry I made you watch me become a monster. I am sorry I killed those people. I am sorry I failed to save the world. But I will not compound those failures by destroying what little remains of who I was." Alfred straightened, despite his wound, despite exhaustion and pain, and his voice carried the warmth that had sustained Bruce through 30 years of darkness. "Then you have not failed, Master Bruce," the old butler said. "You have simply remembered that being Batman means holding to principles even when they cost everything. I am proud of you, my boy. Your parents would be proud of you. You walked through hell and emerged still human. That is victory enough." The massive doors behind Talia swung open, and Ra's al Ghul emerged from the chamber beyond, ancient and powerful, and carrying in his hands a device that could only be the manual override for the Demon's Eye satellite network. He looked at Bruce standing weaponless, at Talia crying with relief and gratitude, at Damien confused by the sudden reversal, and at Alfred bleeding but unbowed. The demon's head studied them for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before finally speaking. "Well done, Detective," Raz said, and his voice held no mockery, no triumph, only genuine respect. "You passed the final test. The test I designed knowing you would almost certainly fail, hoping you would fail, because your failure would have justified everything I have done for 6 centuries. But you succeeded. You went to the very edge of corruption, stared into the abyss I have inhabited for longer than civilizations, and chose to step back rather than fall. You proved that heroism is not naivety, that principles can survive contact with reality's cruelest choices, that perhaps humanity deserves one more chance." He walked forward slowly, holding the override device like an offering, stopping just beyond Bruce's reach. "The great purification will not occur," he said. "I am canceling the operation, destroying the weapons, dismantling the networks I spent 200 years building. Not because you stopped me through force or cunning, but because you demonstrated something I believed was impossible. That someone can face the trolley problem at global scale and refuse to pull the lever, refuse to choose who lives and dies, refuse to accept that morality is just mathematics with pretensions." Raz handed the device to Bruce, the gesture carrying the weight of surrender and respect, and something that might have been gratitude. "I am tired, detective," he continued, 643 years old, and finally ready to die. "The Lazarus Pits no longer work for me. The madness grows worse with each resurrection, and I have learned that immortality without growth is just repeated stagnation. So I am giving you what you wanted. The world survives. The League disbands, and I will walk into the desert and let nature take its course, dying as I should have died 6 centuries ago when plague took my family." He looked at Talia, at his daughter, who had betrayed him, and remained loyal simultaneously, navigating impossible contradictions with grace he no longer possessed. "You are free," he said to her, "free to love this man, to raise your son away from League influence, to build a life that serves creation rather than destruction. I am sorry I robbed you of childhood. Sorry I made you a weapon. Sorry I could not be the father you deserved. You are my greatest achievement and my greatest failure, and I love you more than my mission. Remember that when you think of me." Talia collapsed crying. Years of accumulated pain and impossible choices finally finding release. And Bruce held her while their son watched with eyes too knowing for his age. Ra's al Ghul turned to leave, to walk back into the chamber that held the original Lazarus Pit. But Bruce's voice stopped him. "Wait," Bruce said. "You do not get to walk away. You do not get peaceful death after everything you have done. Everyone you have killed, every atrocity you have committed or planned. You face trial. You answer for your crimes. You accept that justice applies even to immortal philosophers who believe they are above human law." Razum looked back over his shoulder, and his expression held amusement mixed with resignation. "Justice," he said. "You want me to face justice in courts designed by the civilization I was trying to save from itself, judged by people who cannot comprehend the weight of centuries or the calculations I have made. Very well, detective. I will submit to your justice, will stand trial and accept whatever punishment your systems decree. But know this, the verdict was delivered when you refused to kill me. That moment, that choice, was the only judgment that mattered, and I am at peace with it." Chapter 12, The World That Continues. The trial of Ra's al Ghul became the most watched legal proceeding in human history, broadcast to billions who still did not fully understand how close they had come to extinction. The prosecution presented evidence of murders spanning centuries, of genocides planned and partially executed, of terrorism and manipulation on scales that made conventional war crimes seem quaint by comparison. The defense argued diminished capacity, claiming that repeated Lazarus resurrections had created mental illness that removed criminal culpability, that Ra's al Ghul was more victim than villain, a man broken by immortality and driven mad by loss. Bruce Wayne testified for 6 hours, describing the plot to kill billions, the weapons that had been destroyed, the satellite network that had been dismantled. But he also testified about his own actions, the torture and killing he had done descending through League defenses, the lines he had crossed believing the end justified the means. He pled guilty to 23 counts of murder, to 6 counts of torture, to conspiracy and breaking international law in service of stopping the Great Purification. The courtroom was silent when he finished. When Bruce Wayne, revealed Batman, admitted to the world that he had become exactly what he spent his life fighting. Some called him a hero who had done what was necessary. Others called him a hypocrite who had betrayed everything he claimed to represent. The truth, Bruce thought, was probably both. He had saved billions through methods that made him a murderer, proved principles mattered by violating them, demonstrated that heroism sometimes looked identical to villainy when viewed from certain angles. The verdict came 3 months later. Ra's al Ghul was found guilty on 4,216 counts. Sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, to be held in a secure facility designed specifically to prevent escape and resist League rescue attempts. He accepted the sentence with equanimity, bowed to the judge, and walked to confinement with the dignity of someone who had already won the only victory that mattered. Bruce Wayne was found guilty on all counts, but sentenced to time served in community service. The court, acknowledging the impossible situation he had faced, and the fact that billions lived because of choices he made. He was stripped of the right to operate as Batman, forbidden from vigilante activity, required to register as a convicted felon. The symbol that had protected Gotham for 30 years was officially dead, killed by the man who had created it. Gotham mourned and celebrated simultaneously, unsure how to process the revelation that their protector had been both savior and killer, hero and criminal, the best and worst of what humanity could become. Some called for his head, demanding harsher punishment for someone who had betrayed the public trust so thoroughly. Others built shrines to Batman, celebrated the man who had sacrificed everything, including his own principles, to save people who would never know they had been in danger. Bruce Wayne accepted it all, the praise and condemnation, the complexity and contradiction, understanding that this was what justice looked like when you stripped away the mythology. Messy, unsatisfying, human. He sold Wayne Manor, donated the Batcave's equipment to the Justice League, and moved into a small apartment in Crime Alley where his parents had died and his mission had begun. He spent his days working in a community center, teaching children to read and helping families access services they needed. He spent his nights lying awake, remembering the faces of people he had killed, wondering if there had been another way, knowing he would never have an answer that brought peace. Damian grew up divided between parents who loved him, but could not be together, spending summers with Bruce and school years with Talia, who had left the League and was rebuilding her life as a university professor, specializing in ecological restoration. The boy struggled with his dual nature, with training that made him deadly and principles that said killing was wrong, with the genetic legacy of both Batman and the Demon's Head. But he had something neither of his parents had possessed at his age, the knowledge that he could choose who to become, that nature and nurture were influences but not destiny, that every day offered the opportunity to be better than yesterday. Alfred recovered from his wound, but retired from service, opening a tea shop in Gotham's financial district that became quietly famous for its quality and for the elderly British man who treated every customer like family. He never spoke publicly about his time in the caves, about what he had witnessed Bruce becoming, but he visited the Crime Alley apartment twice weekly, and they drank tea together in comfortable silence that needed no words. The Justice League continued their work, forever changed by the knowledge that even heroes could fall, that principles were both essential and insufficient, that saving the world sometimes required becoming something you could never entirely return from. Superman never quite forgave Bruce, the philosophical distance between them too great to bridge, but he respected the choices made even when he disagreed with them. Wonder Woman understood in ways Superman could not. warrior culture acknowledging that some battles could not be won cleanly, that victory sometimes meant surviving with honor, damaged but intact. Talia visited Bruce once a year, on the anniversary of the day he had refused to kill her, and they would walk through Gotham streets, talking about Damien and the world that continued, despite all the reasons it should not. Their relationship existed in a space beyond romance or simple friendship. Two people bound by shared trauma and a child, and the knowledge that they had each paid different prices for the same war. Sometimes she would stay the night, seeking comfort in familiar arms, but by morning she was always gone, returning to the life she had built away from League shadows and Batman's legacy. Ra's al Ghul lived in his secure cell, reading and meditating, and corresponding with scholars who wanted to understand his 6th century perspective on human civilization. He wrote a memoir that became an unlikely bestseller, arguing that his methods had been wrong but his diagnosis correct, that humanity was still on a trajectory towards self-destruction, and that the Great Purification had merely been delayed rather than prevented. He granted Bruce one interview after the book was published, the two men sitting across a table in a visiting room designed to prevent physical contact. "Do you regret it?" Bruce asked. "Any of it? The killing, the planning, the centuries of manipulation and death?" Raz considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I regret that it was necessary," he said finally. "I regret that humanity could not save itself without someone like me forcing the issue. I regret that you had to become a killer to stop me, that my daughter lost her childhood, that my grandson will forever be divided between two legacies. But do I regret trying to save the world through methods no one else would embrace? No, I do not regret that. Because even in failure, even in this cell, I know I was right about the diagnosis even if I was wrong about the cure." They spoke for another hour, discussing philosophy and morality and the weight of impossible choices, finding no answers but arriving at mutual respect that transcended their opposition. As Bruce prepared to leave, Raz offered one final observation. "You broke your principles to stop me, detective, and you have spent every day since wondering if you made the right choice. But ask yourself this: would you make the same choice again? If faced with identical circumstances, identical stakes, would you torture and kill to save billions? Because if the answer is yes, then perhaps principles are not absolutes, but guidelines we follow until the cost of following them becomes unbearable. And if the answer is no, then perhaps you have learned nothing and will be exactly as unprepared when the next impossible choice arrives." Bruce left without answering, because he did not have an answer, because the question was designed to create doubt rather than resolve it. Because Ra's al Ghul was still playing the same game, even from a prison cell. But he thought about it, turned it over in his mind during sleepless nights, and slowly arrived at something resembling clarity. He would not make the same choice again, would not torture or kill even to save billions, because he had learned that the moment he accepted evil methods for good purposes, he had lost his ability to distinguish between them. The people he had killed in those caves deserved life as much as the billions he had saved. Their deaths were not acceptable sacrifices, but murders that he would carry forever. And if that meant failing next time, if that meant billions dying because Bruce Wayne refused to compromise his principles, then he would live with that failure too. Because some prices were too high to pay, even for victory. But he also understood Russ's point. The terrible logic that made heroism seem like self-indulgent naivety when faced with cosmic scales. The trolley problem did not disappear just because you refused to pull the lever. The people tied to the tracks died whether you acted or not. The difference was whether you carried responsibility for deaths through action or deaths through inaction, and Bruce was no longer certain which was heavier. Maybe that uncertainty was the point. Maybe Ra's al Ghul's final gift was forcing Bruce to acknowledge that moral clarity was a luxury of simple situations, that complexity bred doubt, and that doubt kept you human, even when circumstances demanded you become something else. Heroes who were certain of their righteousness became monsters too easily. But heroes who questioned everything, who carried their failures and compromises and impossible choices, they remained human even when humanity seemed insufficient. 5 years after the trial, Bruce Wayne sat in his small apartment watching news coverage of an environmental summit where nations were finally, slowly, beginning to address the ecological collapse that Ra's al Ghul had warned about for centuries. The solutions being proposed were inadequate, the timelines too long, the political will too fragile. But humanity was trying, stumbling forward through mistakes and backsliding and occasional progress, doing what they had always done, surviving, despite themselves, refusing to accept extinction even when all evidence suggested it was inevitable. Damien visited that evening, now 9 years old, and struggling with 3rd grade because his classmates did not understand why he knew 17 languages, but could not grasp social cues or playground politics. "Father," the boy asked, sitting at the small kitchen table while Bruce prepared dinner, "do you think grandfather was right? Do you think the world would have been better if the Great Purification had succeeded?" Bruce thought carefully before answering, understanding that his response would shape how his son understood the past and approached the future. "I think the world would have been different," he said finally. "Smaller, more controlled, possibly more stable in the short term, but also poorer, less diverse, missing billions of perspectives and dreams and possibilities that exist now because those people survived. Your grandfather measured value through efficiency and sustainability. I measure it through potential and complexity. Neither is objectively correct. They are simply different frameworks for determining what matters." He set dinner on the table, simple food prepared with the care Alfred had taught him, and continued, "But here is what I know for certain. The world that exists now, messy and broken and stubbornly refusing to die, is the world billions of people fought to protect. They do not know they fought, do not know they were ever in danger, but they wake up every morning and choose to continue. That choice, made millions of times daily by ordinary people who never asked to be part of cosmic debates about humanity's worth. That choice is the answer to your grandfather's question. People want to live. They want to love and create and dream and struggle. And my job, Batman's job, was never to decide if they deserved that chance. It was to protect their right to make the choice for themselves." Damien nodded slowly, processing wisdom that would take years to fully understand, and they ate together in comfortable silence while the world outside continued its stumbling progress toward whatever future humanity would create. It would not be the future Ra's al Ghul had envisioned, carefully controlled and sustainably managed. It would be messier than that, more chaotic, more human. And that was exactly as it should be. Because in the end, that was what Bruce Wayne had learned in the caves beneath the Arabian Desert, in the moment he had refused to kill Talia, in the years since when he had questioned every choice and found no certainty. Humanity was not a problem to be solved, or a plague to be cured. It was an experiment still running, an unfinished story, a question that could only be answered by letting people write their own responses. And Batman, broken symbol carried by a broken man, had protected their right to keep writing, had sacrificed his principles to preserve theirs, had become a monster so billions could remain human, had walked through hell and emerged still believing that people were worth saving even when all evidence suggested otherwise. That belief, stubborn and irrational and entirely unsupported by facts, was the difference between heroes and philosophers, between Batman and Ra's al Ghul, between hope and certainty. And Bruce Wayne would carry it until the day he died, knowing it was insufficient, knowing it was naive, knowing it was all he had left. The world continued. The war was over. And somewhere in a secure prison, an immortal warrior who could not die smiled in his cell, finally at peace, because he had been proven wrong, because humanity had been given another chance, because the student had surpassed the teacher in the only way that mattered, by refusing to become him, by choosing hope over calculation, by remaining, despite everything, heroically, impossibly human. The end. In the eternal struggle between justice and survival, between principles and pragmatism, between the hero's path and the philosopher's logic, Batman discovered that the greatest victory was not defeating his enemy, but refusing to become him. Ra's al Ghul, the immortal enemy Batman could never truly defeat, was finally stopped not through superior force or cunning strategy, but through the simple, stubborn insistence that some lines must never be crossed, even to save the world. And in that refusal, in that moment of weakness that was actually strength, Bruce Wayne proved what the demon's head had spent 6 centuries doubting, that humanity, for all its flaws and failures, deserved one more sunrise, one more chance, one more day, to stumble towards something better. The war between Batman and Ra's al Ghul was over. But the larger war, the eternal struggle to save humanity from itself, would continue long after both men were dust, because that was what it meant to be human. To keep fighting despite impossible odds, to keep hoping despite all evidence, to keep believing that tomorrow could be better than today, even when today was already so much darker than it needed to be. Good night.